Good morning. We'll call to order the meeting of the Regional Transportation Commission of Southern Nevada. Mr. Snow.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the Commission. Staff would like to recommend that item number 27 be deleted from the agenda.
So we'll entertain a motion on that. Motion on the floor. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed? That motion carries.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Your next item is to receive the General Manager's report. First of all, I'd like to officially welcome Councilwoman Lois Tarkanian to the Regional Transportation Commission. We're delighted to have you here, Councilwoman. Welcome.
Lois, we had set a rule at our last meeting that one round of applause per introduction, so you only get one. You got it at flood control. So everybody would have applauded, but they learned last meeting. It's a special occasion. Let's welcome Lois Tarkanian.
Mr. Chairman, members of the Commission, each quarter we're pleased to bring to you the winner of the RTC Superstar of the Quarter Award. These employees exemplify superb customer service skills, a commitment to the RTC's vision, and of course perform at a level that is above and beyond normal job requirements. Our Superstar of the Quarter is an individual who has worked for the agency for more than a decade. He manages and troubleshoots many of the electronic devices on our vehicles to ensure that our transit system is running efficiently and effectively. He interacts with our transit riders, our contractors, and various employees throughout the agency. Now, whether you're a transit rider, a vehicle operator, or one of the administrative staff, he always has a positive attitude and a willingness to help, demonstrating exemplary customer service. He recently assisted a transit rider whose monthly pass was stuck behind the fare box. Going beyond his job duties, he removed the fare box, retrieved the pass, contacted the transit rider, and left the pass at the Bonneville Transit Center for the transit rider to pick up. Among his colleagues, he is a team player known to recommend logical and sound solutions to technical issues that have produced cost-saving measures for the agency. He's a great example of what a public employee should be. I'm pleased to announce that our Superstar of the Quarter winner today is Jeff Boylan, RTC Senior Equipment Technician. We'd like to have Jeff come forward and have his picture taken with the Commission, and we have a few things for the Chairman to present to Jeff.
Oh, okay. I would like to thank my supervisors. First off, excellent boss, John Neville, who's up there today. Outstanding. I've worked for a number of supervisors in the Navy, in the Army, and in the private sector, and he's by far above all that I've worked for. So he's an amazing leader. And the rest of the chain all the way up, and all my friends and coworkers, outstanding team, and I can't do anything that I do without you guys. So thank you.
Next, we have the Institute for Transportation Development and Policy recently rated Las Vegas as one of the top 5 leading cities in the nation for providing bus-based transportation that is modern, efficient, and effective. The Institute acknowledged the benefits of the RTC's Express program and recognize how this service connects Valley residents from low-density neighborhoods to jobs and destinations in the busy downtown and Las Vegas Strip corridor. And the article really highlights and focuses on the features of the service, including its off-board fare collection, modern and attractive vehicles, the shelters, and bus-only lanes. And this distinction garnered both local, and a lot of national media attention. So congratulations to the Commission, to our contractor, Veolia, and to the RTC staff. Next, the RTC's FAST division, which stands for Freeway and Arterial System of Transportation, was recently recognized by the Institute of Transportation Engineers and was awarded the 2011 Management and Operations Intelligent Transportation System Council Project Achievement Award for the development of the RTC FAST dashboard. Now, for decades, transportation professionals have realized the value of making the best use of freeway flow detector data. It's very technical and complicated, but through our in-house efforts, we've launched a remarkable solution to that complicated data with the development of the RTC FAST dashboard, which is just peeking through the screen in the back there. We'll show you a closer look at that in just a second. But the FAST dashboard is a software program that was developed and written by our own staff, and it integrates freeway flow detector data, which is the radar detectors on the freeway, and converts that into detailed reports that provide simple-to-use travel time-related information and quantifies recurring and non-recurring congestion by corridor, time of day, and day type. Now, here's an example of what the FAST dashboard looks like. Now, I know as you look at the speedometers on the bottom middle portion of the screen, most of you are accustomed to seeing the speedometers in the far left red portion of the spectrum, but the interactive dashboard homepage monitors and prevents Las Vegas Metropolitan Freeway real-time and historic traffic condition through live map and animation, and plots daily peak speeds, time of day speeds, average speed, and congestion plots from different perspectives. In just a few minutes, a weekly or monthly congestion report for a selected corridor can be generated, and it has been extensively utilized by RTC and NDOT and the public to convey live traffic information and traffic counts and present that information in a much more understandable fashion. I'd like to ask Brian Hoff, Director of FAST, and Gong Shev from FAST to stand and be recognized. These gentlemen and other staff members from FAST contributed to the development of this remarkable and extremely useful tool, and I should say groundbreaking tool in their field, so congratulations to them. Mr. Chairman, before we conclude our General Manager's report, we have one more item to discuss, and the RTC would like to recognize, thank, and bid a fond farewell to Councilman David Bennett. If you know Councilman Bennett, he's very modest and doesn't like the spotlight, but as a public servant, he has accomplished so much for the residents in Mesquite and for Southern Nevadans, and he's deserving of this recognition today. Councilman Bennett has been a part of the RTC's Board of Commissioners since July 2007. As a board member, he's played an active and instrumental role in addressing our transportation issues and has contributed to making significant transportation improvements in our valley that we're benefiting from today. Not just from his regional perspective, but particularly in the city of Mesquite, Councilman Bennett has been influential in securing funding for the West Mesquite Interchange Design Build project, which we just broke ground on, the Lower Flat Top Mesa Parkway, Pioneer Boulevard to Bertha Howe Avenue roadway project, and various roadway maintenance, traffic signal, and pavement projects. Through his efforts, he has helped to secure millions of dollars in funding for transportation projects for the city of Mesquite. Now, just on a personal note, I don't have this perspective that you all do, who have the responsibility to push the buttons and to make the tough votes. But I can tell you that from my limited perspective, your jobs can often be some difficult, challenging things. You go to the grocery store and you go to church and you meet constituents who have criticism, or sometimes it's those subtle suggestions for how you could change things to do better that seemingly seem so simple but are much more complicated. And the pay that you all get is maybe reflective of a part-time job, even though you're putting in more than full-time. And I certainly would like to recognize that we have benefited from having Councilman Bennett's service on this commission. The community, the region is a much better place for it, and so is Mesquite. And we would like to just, we have something for the chairman to present to the councilman, and we do appreciate his service, and we'll miss him.
Do we have a photographer? We need a picture with the whole board. Photo. Let's enjoy the moment.
Mr. Chair, in the 12 years that I've served as an elected official, I've had the opportunity to travel the state pretty extensively. I've been to most of the incorporated cities in the state, a lot of the counties. I've met a lot of public officials, both elected and appointed. And I have to say, and I mean this sincerely, through that experience, I've met some wonderful and some great public servants. But my experience here on this board, this commission, and on flood control, Gail and his staff, between these two commissions, really, this is the finest group of public servants that I've had the pleasure of knowing and serving with. And I mean that from not only a staff-appointed perspective, but also from an elected perspective. You all are dedicated public servants who are trying to do the best job that you possibly can. I appreciate the progressive, forward-thinking nature of these two commissions and staff from a staff perspective, and the efficiency that's achieved with the public's dollars, with tax dollars. So won't say a whole lot more, just to appreciate and thank you all for the time that I've been able to serve with you.
Well, Councilman, I'd just like to offer a few words also, and those comments are appreciated, but it's back at you. I love your style. We've had the opportunity to serve together for many years now, and you have a very silent but powerful voice. When you speak, people listen. Your contributions not only to the city of Mesquite, but to this regional board have been outstanding. You've been a great reflection on your city and certainly on our board at the flood control and RTC. I think I speak on behalf of the commission. We wish you everything good that we would like in your post-elected career, and know that you always have friends and you always have a home back here at this commission. But thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Councilman Bennett. We now go to your consent agenda, which is made up of items 3 through 32, which may be taken in one motion.
Motion on the floor. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We now go to item 33, which is that the Regional Transportation Commission receive a recommendation from staff on the protest submitted by Veolia Transportation Services Incorporated for contract number 11-029, operation and maintenance of fixed route transit services, awarded on May 19th, 2011, and take action as appropriate. Now, Mr. Chairman, we have with us today your special counsel, Kent Woodman. Let me just make a brief introduction of Kent. Long years ago, when the Federal Transit Administration, as we know it now, was called as the Urban Mass Transit Administration, Kent Woodman was working for that organization in the capacity as an attorney. He has served both the Urban Mass Transit Administration and the Federal Transit Administration as general counsel for a number of years. He's also served as the acting administrator of the Federal Transit Administration numerous times. He brings with him a tremendous amount of experience, knowledge, and wisdom. And what we'd like to have happen is, what we're recommending to the Commission is we would like to go in this process where we'd hear from Kent, and he would give us a general overview of the issue at hand and kind of walk us through some of the issues that we need to consider. And then we'll hear from Zev Kaplan, our general counsel, with regard to one of the specific issues on the protest. And then we have Jane Sutter-Stark. Kent and Jane, I should mention, are with the law firm Thompson Coburn. And Jane will walk through some of the more detailed protest, the issues that have been brought to light by Veolia in this protest, and address them. And then we'll have some concluding remarks from Kent Woodman, and then I'll make my recommendation to the commission, and the commission can take action and discuss what they would like to do.
Okay. Comments from the board just on procedurally. I'd like to add this, and I'll have some comments later, but I anticipate that there may be some potential litigation coming out of this meeting. And we'll get to that point, but along with the presentations, I would like to, with the board's support, I would like to offer both First Transit and Veolia the opportunity to put concise remarks on to the public record regarding this agenda item and regarding comments coming from these presentations, if that's okay with the board. And then after those comments are made, I would like to, before any recommendations, I would like to also ask the board members then to put anything on the record regarding this agenda item that they wish. I certainly will be making some comments, but if that is agreeable to the board, then we can move forward.
Thank you, Jacob, and Mr. Chairman and members of the commission. And Jacob kind of emphasized it was years ago, and at one point in the past, I was the chief counsel of the Federal Transit Agency, and one of the difficult parts of that job at that time was I had responsibility for hearing and ruling on bid protests from transit agencies all over the country. And through that somewhat painful process, I learned two pretty clear things. One of them is, in looking at a great number of protests, that they really did somewhat fall into two categories. There are protests filed that are really like appellate briefs. They are centered on legal argument. They're supported by case law. And those type or category of protests tend to be pretty dispassionate in tone. There's another category of protests which is much more aggressive in nature, which tends to rely a lot less on legal authority, which normally has the characteristics of attacking other bidders, attacking the procuring agency, or attacking the staff. And unfortunately, I have to say, looking at the protest in this case by Veolia, other than the legal issue of the open meeting law and the voting requirements, the protest really fits squarely in that second category I've described. The other thing I learned in that job was, while these procurement issues can be very complex and they can be complicated, and you can see because you've got over 100 pages of materials sitting in front of you in terms of a protest and a response and our recommended disposition of the protest, there actually are three very simple rules in procurement that are critical to having a successful process. The first one is to establish very clear rules in your procurement document as to how you're going to proceed. The second one is to strictly follow those rules through every step of the process. And the third one is to award to the winner. Most of the people who have problems with the procurement process do it for the simple reason they didn't follow one of those rules. We have gone through diligently and analyzed every count in this protest, and there are over 20 different claims made in the protest. We have found the arguments made in the protest to be without legal merit. Our recommendation, and our recommendation as outside counsel, our recommendation in working with your general counsel, Zev, is that this protest be denied in every element. The protest, and we're going to go through it item by item, but a quick synopsis.
Excuse
the
me.
Protest.
Excuse me. So your last comment, denied in every element, are you also including the open meeting?
Yes, yes.
Okay, and you're addressing the open meeting law.
And Zev is going to speak specifically on that point.
All right, well, then your comments, we're going to try to set a fair public record here, so let's be very specific. You are not only the elements you're going to go through, but you are also talking about, your opening statement said you felt that everything but the open meeting issue. And then your comments
What I said was in looking at this, everything but the open meeting law issue is very easily dismissed.
Okay.
It is basically a tax on the staff or a tax on the competitive bidder. The open meeting law, in my view, and Zev is going to comment on this, presents a more legitimate legal issue.
Okay.
So I'd make that
Fair
distinction.
enough. Fair enough. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, point of order. Lee Roberts, attorney for Veolia. I apologize for the interruption, but given the accusations of waiver from First Transit arising out of the last meeting, I feel compelled at this point to object to Mr. Woodman presenting any further recommendations in support of the conclusion he just reached. Mr. Woodman is not a member of the Nevada Bar. It would be inappropriate for him to opine on any matter of Nevada law which governs this procurement. It would be unethical for him to do so, and it would be unethical for this board to assist him in violating Nevada law by practicing here without a license. We object to the board receiving any recommendations from Mr. Woodman. Thank you.
Actually, Mr. Chairman, our response is...
Hold on.
May I respond to that?
Yeah, I just want to clarify what we just heard. Zev, I'll go to you. I thought, and again, I apologize if I'm mistaken, I thought Kent was dealing with FTA requirements, procurement, and such. And that's why I asked for the distinction, just to make sure.
That's correct. Their firm works in conjunction with me to assist the agency and myself in providing legal advice. As to any state law related matters, that's where I have the lead. But regardless, anything they do is under my direction and supervision to assist me in advising you. And that's totally permissible under the Nevada Bar rules. This issue's been raised in the past, and the state bar has found no merit to it.
Okay.
And that was, over 10 years ago when Robert Kroll was chairman of the state bar, president of the state bar.
All right, well, the point of order has been placed on the public record. Our counsel has responded to it, so I think it's there. And again, Kent, I apologize for the interruption, so please continue.
That's fine, Mr. Chairman. And for the record, our analysis primarily focuses on the FTA requirements on federal procurement law. And just before I turn it over to Zev and then to Jane, based on our analysis, we believe that this protest relies on inapplicable law to the extent that it relies on any law. It includes misstatements of the facts, and in the end, it's not much more than a tortured attempt to rescore the proposals and get a different result. So now we want to walk through each one of the major elements of the protest, and for that purpose, I'll yield to Zev Kaplan and then Jane.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, as Ken indicated, the primary legal argument before you in this protest regards the vote that was taken at the May meeting. So I would just run through our analysis, which I believe you've all had, and as had Veolia prior to the time of their protest, so they've had an opportunity to address this. I had shared my preliminary opinion with them beforehand in fairness to them.
And First Transit, did they have a copy of yours?
Yes, they did. Both parties did. And in fact, I believe if you review Veolia's protest, you'd see that they actually responded to some of my arguments in their actual protest. Looking historically, the RTC in 1965 was created by state law, or enabled the county to create a Street and Highway Commission, which is now the RTC. At that time, the county ordinance provided the operationally how the RTC would operate, along with the state law saying the commission, which is the RTC, can decide its own organization and meetings. Over the past 30-some years, you've adopted policies and procedures which have conformed to the county ordinance, which stated that a majority of the members is required to have a quorum, and that a majority of the quorum present is required for action. The issue arises here because in 2001, the legislature amended the open meeting law stating that any public body that has only elected officials as its members is required to have a majority vote of all of the members of the board rather than the quorum. And that contradicts with the past practice and of the RTC. In looking at that legislation, which was SB 239, I believe, from 2001 session, it was there. It addressed the open meeting law section. It then went in the actual bill and addressed 110 other governmental entities and went into their own enabling legislation and operational statutes and amended them to conform to the open meeting law. The RTC was not included in any of that list. And when one of the sponsors of the bill was asked by the chairman of the committee who this would apply to and what was the intent, he provided a 4-page list of that 110 agencies. The RTCs were never mentioned. I'd point out that the co-sponsor of the bill at that time, Assemblyman David Parks, had formerly been the assistant director of the RTC. Clearly, if he would have known of the RTC's existence, how it operated, and if the intent was to include it, certainly would have included it. None of the hearings mention RTCs. None of the bill mentions RTCs. Then subsequently in 2009, and so following that, the RTC has continued to operate as it always had prior to that amendment. Never any challenges to it by anyone, including the Attorney General, who is charged with enforcement of the open meeting law. In 2009 session of the legislature, the RTC had its own bill, which amended the statutes of the RTC to add some new responsibilities. It also recodified it into a new chapter, Chapter 277A as the RTC Act. At that time, the legislature never again addressed the RTCs with regard to this requirement in the open meeting law, as they had done to all the other entities that they wanted to address in 2001. Certainly the Legislative Council and the legislature, if they had intended to include the RTCs, could have and would have at that time. They didn't. The other issue goes to the fact that under federal law and under state law, the governor under state law has the authority to designate an RTC as the MPO for this region, which is the Metropolitan Planning Organization. The federal laws in the early 1990s, starting with was the acronym ICE-T, subsequently T21, and then most recently Safety Lou, are the Transportation Authorization Acts by the United States Congress. They enable the governor to designate, along with the state law, to designate RTCs as the MPO board. Pursuant to that, there is an agreement that requires, between the RTC, the state of Nevada, and the RTC's member entities, requires that the state have representation on the RTC board for purposes of MPO matters. And ever since that time, the NDOT director has been the representative of the state. She's not present today, but has been a member of this board as a non-elected official to participate on MPO matters. Does not participate on all matters, but is a member of the board for MPO matters. And my interpretation was that that takes that out of the requirement of the open meeting law that says a board is solely made up of elected officials. There's been AG's opinions that dealt with another agency in Washoe County, the Truckee Meadows Planning Agency, where they did not have solely a board of elected officials, where there's some appointed officials. The fact that the appointed official participates or votes is irrelevant. Just the fact that you may have a non-elected official on your board takes it out of that requirement of the open meeting law. And that's why I opined and advised you the way I did at your vote last meeting. So for that reason, we think that the argument that the open meeting law applies and the vote was improper fails and is invalid, and that you took proper action at your last meeting. Today you only had 7 members present. You had a quorum. The majority of the quorum voted to recommend award of the contract, approve award of the contract. Today you have 8 members present, and it would require any action you take today would be 5 members who are here to take any positive action. On the second issue, there was raised the issue of that the proposed contract was never properly before you because back in your March meeting, you received a recommendation from the staff and the evaluation committee as to who should be awarded the contract. There was no action item that could be taken, and their argument is that the RFP required that the board approve the recommendation. Now, the board could not take action to approve specifically, but it did de facto do so by directing staff to go and negotiate a contract, bring back a contract for award. At the time you consider the award, that gets subsumed into the fact that obviously you've accepted the recommendation if you're approving the contract. Also, you always have, this is an RFP, not an invitation to bid. You have more flexibility and you can waive any minor irregularities that you deem appropriate. So by going forward, directing staff to approve, to go negotiate a contract, bring it back for your approval, and then having voted on that approval, you have so waived that alleged irregularity if it did exist.
Okay. Zev, if I could interrupt just for a moment, because I'm trying to find which opinion raised this issue.
That was in Veolia's protest. It's their second issue.
No, I don't think, okay. This would be in the June 6th, 2011 Lionel Sawyer and Collins.
No, that's first transits. It be in the Weinberg, Wheeler, Hudgens, Gunn, and Dial submittal.
Zev,
Oh, I'm sorry.
I want to reference your point on the March.
Oh.
Because
Okay.
it had a question, and
Okay.
just because
Sorry.
I think it's important, the March, April, May, and where we are today.
Right.
Just so I understand, because with all due respect to the legal opinions, they're great arguments, but they're on opposite sides.
Right.
So
No.
I guess that's what makes it so interesting reading. The,
Takes two lawyers.
what's it? I highlighted it. No, that's ours. But, in fact, Mayor, thank you. I think we, the board, are in possession of the Lionel Sawyer Collins, June 6, 2011 correspondence. The Weinberg, Wheeler, Hudgens, Gunn, and Dial LLC, May 31st correspondence.
Right.
And then a third correspondence prepared by staff, the team.
Correct.
Okay, those are the three documents, and if we can refer to those.
Correct.
But in Lionel Sawyer's, they brought up this issue as far as what happened at the March meeting, what happened at the April meeting, the May, and so forth. So, and maybe the interruption is not appropriate now, but I do want to revisit those actions to see what it has as far as relevance to protesting, challenging waivers and that, because I really didn't understand after reading both. So if we could, after the presentations, come back at least to that issue, that'll be another one. And I apologize for the
That's okay.
interruption.
No problem, Mr. Chairman. So as I indicated, it clearly was in the purview of the board to move forward, in our opinion. They raised another state issue regarding that the Nevada law and public policy requires the RFP to be consistent with the contract. As I just indicated to you, when you have an RFP, you have significantly more flexibility than an invitation to bid. And it's in your discretion to waive any minor irregularities. That's even true with bid situations, but clearly with RFPs. And so we do not feel there's any inconsistencies that are raise any significant issues here. And I would also just add one more thing with regard to the first issue, and just so the board is formally informed, we've researched it. There are no cases in Nevada or in any other jurisdiction that we can find that give us a definitive answer to look to as far as the arguments on the open meeting law interpretation. And so we have our position, which we think is a reasonable legal argument that you could have relied on reasonably. And obviously, Veolia has presented their position why they feel that is not the case.
Zev, this is, and I appreciate that last comment, because there have been scores of attorneys that have weighed in on this issue, not officially, but I know that you have spoken to, I'm sure, some of our boards. Mm-hmm. So it's an interesting void.
Yeah, I agree. I agree, and I think I've advised all of you of that in previous briefings, that if we've had them, that there is no definitive answer there. We have what we think is a very reasonable position, and based on sound legal analysis, and Veolia feels they have the same. I think that's the only thing fair I can say about it. Jane Stark will address some of the other more detailed issues with regard to some of the allegations in the protest.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. I will give a brief overview of the response we prepared in response to Veolia's protest and discuss some of the major points that are made in our recommendation to reject the protest. As discussed in the Commissioners' last meeting, the RTC conducted a competitive procurement.
I once again have to object to preserve this. Ms. Stark is not a member of the Nevada Bar. We would object to her offering opinions directly to her client on whether this procurement decision is valid under Nevada law. We agree that counsel from other states can consult with Mr. Kaplan, and then he renders advice to his client. The letter indicates that Ms. Stark gave advice directly to Mr. Snow and now intends to give direct advice to you. And she's not a Nevada lawyer, and we once again raise this objection.
And your objection is noted for the record, and we'll continue.
Thank you. As discussed in the Commissioners' last meeting, the RTC conducted a competitive procurement in accordance with FTA requirements, and I'm going to review those requirements. There are some key procurement principles and obligations imposed by FTA that apply to the RTC in its procurement process and which guided our response to many of the claims made by Veolia in their protest. In a competitive procurement, FTA Circular 4220.1F specifically requires the RTC to identify all factors in evaluating proposals, to specify the relative order of importance of those evaluation factors, to establish and use a specific method to conduct evaluations of the proposals received, and to award to a responsible offerer whose proposal is the most advantageous to the Commission with price and other factors considered consistent with the process established in the RFP. Further, FTA specifically prohibits the RTC from modifying its evaluation factors after proposals have been submitted and requires the RTC to adhere to the evaluation plan and scoring mechanism to avoid any appearance of bias. In short, the RTC cannot now change the evaluation methodology established in Part 2 of the RFP. Consistent with these clear FTA requirements and procurement principles, the RTC did in fact adhere to the process specified in the RFP. It scored technical and price proposals in accordance with the listed evaluation factors and their order of importance and the percentage weight to given to technical, which was 45%, and price, which was 55%. Now turning to some of the allegations made by Veolia in their protest, several of the allegations contest the evaluation process conducted by the RTC. Veolia claimed, for example, that the scoring of two evaluators were aberrant, that subfactors were arbitrarily created, that price was given more weight than disclosed in the RFP, that the evaluators did not examine the reasonableness of First Transit's price, and no price analysis was conducted by the RTC. Taking these issues in turn, Veolia's disagreement with the low scores it received from one particular evaluator in comparison with other scores from the panel, and Veolia's disagreement with a high score given to First Transit over Veolia by another evaluator is not a basis to eliminate those evaluators' scores as Veolia advocates. Evaluation is a subjective process, and federal procurement cases give deference to the individual judgment of evaluators. Absent demonstrated bias, which is not even alleged, the scores stand. The RTC cannot now eliminate scores and change the scoring process under FTA's requirements. Contrary to Veolia's allegation, no sub-factors were arbitrarily created. The evaluation factors and a description of the issues to be considered under those factors were specified in Section 205B of the RFP, and they were incorporated verbatim into the score sheets used by the evaluators in scoring. The RTC did not give price more weight during the scoring than indicated in the RFP, as Veolia alleges. Price was afforded a weight of 55% in the total score. Veolia's contention that a particular evaluator double-counted savings from a reduced number of supervisors is not correct. The evaluators do not score price, but technical qualifications. The RTC asked both parties in their BAFOs, their best and final offers, to use a supervisor ratio of 1 to 30 vehicles. And in fact, the evaluator likewise noted Veolia's savings from this ratio, which was even higher than First Transit's savings. This is a fact that Veolia failed to disclose in their protest. On the price reasonableness issue, the scoring of price was strictly mathematical, as set out in Section 205C of the RFP, and that process was followed by the RTC. Further, the RTC did in fact conduct a price analysis in this procurement as required by FTA. RTC's finance office conducted a comparison of all 3 price proposals received. They compared First Transit's price to Veolia's actual costs in 2008 and 2009. And as you know, the RTC also hired financial analysts to confirm the RTC's analysis. Veolia's protest also argues that the contract with First Transit contains material changes from that in the draft contract included in the RFP. Veolia has confused the type of procurement conducted by the RTC. The RTC used a competitive negotiation. As Zev has mentioned, it was not a low bid. Under competitive negotiation process, discussions and negotiations are not only permissible, but they are an inherent part of the process. The RTC's RFP was also clear on this point. It specifically stated that negotiations would occur, and the contract was clearly indicated to be a draft. Thus, the contract's use of a performance bond instead of retainage, the changes to 2 liquidated damages provisions, a phase-in of the certification requirement for mechanics, and a use of a 2-step payment process, all alleged by Veolia to be improper, were clearly permissible contractual changes. On these issues, the RTC specifically asked both proposers to price a performance bond in their BAFO. Veolia's BAFO included pricing on a performance bond, and Veolia actually advocated the use of a performance bond in lieu of retainage in their questions submitted to the RTC during the procurement process, as well as in their interview with the RTC. The 2-step payment process also incorporated into the contract was a part of First Transit's Innovative Approaches proposal, which was a particular part of the technical proposal requested to be submitted by the RTC. It is also a process that the RTC has used in the past to pay Veolia in prior contracts. Further, the 2-step payment will save the RTC over $2.5 million on a 3-year basis. It is not an advance payment, as Veolia alleges, under FTA standards, since payment will not be made with federal funds prior to the rendering of services. One of the alleged changes to the liquidated damages provisions that is raised by Veolia was in fact made by addendum issued during the procurement process. Veolia expressly acknowledged the receipt of that addendum in their cover letter in submitting their proposals. The other changes to the liquidated damages provisions were either minor or clarifying in nature, and in the case of the grace period, Veolia had a similar grace period under RTC's contract. Veolia's protest also contends that First Transit was afforded a competitive advantage as the incumbent paratransit contractor. However, federal procurement cases have consistently determined that a competitive advantage gained through incumbency or another contract is not improper or inherently unfair. FTA's Best Practices Procurement Manual likewise provides that a contractor can have a fair competitive advantage by virtue of its prior experience and incumbency. Cost savings achieved through performance of another contract is permissible under federal procurement cases, and it is not an unfair advantage. Veolia also argues that it was improper for the RTC not to include transition costs in the scoring of proposal. However, Veolia cannot now protest this scoring methodology, which was clearly set out in the RFP. A protest on that issue was due 5 days prior to the submittal of proposals. Even on the substance, not scoring transition costs has been upheld and found not to be considered unfair treatment. Finally, Veolia argues in its protest that its First Transit's proposal should have been rejected as non-responsive on the basis of an alleged failure to price the Nevada business tax and an alleged failure to disclose prior defaults on public transportation contracts and claims and disputes with other agencies, among other issues. None of these allegations have merit, and some are factually incorrect, and the protest misunderstands the concept of responsiveness. It is unclear whether the Nevada business tax was truly omitted by First Transit in its price proposal or just included in another line item, as First Transit indicates in its That issue aside, however, First Transit has a contractual obligation in its contract with the RTC to pay the tax, regardless of whether it was included in its price, and it bears that risk. On the allegation that First Transit failed to disclose contract defaults, none of the alleged defaults cited by Veolia were in fact defaults on contracts. One was a termination for convenience due to action on the part of the agency. One was a mutually agreeable termination. And the third, involving Boston, a contract was never entered into because the MBTA sought a change in scope, so there was no technical default. Similarly, the allegation that First Transit failed to disclose a claim or dispute with the Chatham Area Transit Authority is factually incorrect. As indicated in First Transit's response submitted to the RTC, there was no adverse judgment rendered. A summary judgment was issued in First Transit's favor in that particular litigation. First Transit's proposal was indeed responsive as it complied with the material requirements of the RFP, and nothing in the required disclosures would provide a basis for the RTC to conclude that First Transit's proposal was non-responsive or unacceptable. In conclusion, the protest does not present any viable claims or bases to set aside the procurement, the scoring of proposals, or recommendation of award to First Transit. Veolia's protest is riddled with inaccuracies, misunderstanding of applicable procurement principles and FTA requirements, and argues for improperly changing the scoring and evaluation process, inappropriately attacking RTC staff. The evaluation process laid out in the RFP must be adhered to and cannot now be changed to suit Veolia's interests. Veolia lost in an objectively conducted procurement, and our recommendation is the process should be denied. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Take a pause. Comments or questions from the board at this point? All right. Councilman Ross?
And I don't want to thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Jacob, this was not in the briefing you briefed me yesterday. So I'm a little confused. You'll have to help speed me up, I guess, because this is not the message I got from your briefings. And I don't know, Council, when you were in that briefing with me. I mean, am I missing something?
No, I'm a little puzzled myself.
So
I'm greatly puzzled.
That's just my only comment, Mr. Chairman.
Well, please help me understand how I can clarify the situation. In my briefing, I didn't provide a detailed overview of the protests. I did make clear that I think that we're in a difficult situation, that there is a great chance that we will have litigation one way or the other. But it's also incumbent upon me as part of this process to ultimately make a recommendation and onto the commission on how I feel about the protest. And I didn't have a chance to complete that until I had a chance to see all of the legal and read all the legal documents, and I did that yesterday afternoon.
And I will, Mr. Chairman.
So I apologize for that.
And I will, Mr. Chairman, I will state on the record that you did share that information with us as it came in a timely fashion, and I appreciate that. But I was unaware of these two individuals, whether they're part of the Nevada Bar or not, in this whole issue. So I guess I'm going to listen and keep my ears open. I mean, my position has not changed, so I'll have other comments, and I reserve those, Mr. Chairman, for later.
Thank you, Councilman. Councilwoman Tarkanian?
I just wanted to say that I was not aware of this. I've been trying to play catch-up on all this. You have been working on this for 9 months. I just was appointed 3 weeks ago to the committee. This is my first time here. I've really valiantly been trying to catch up on all this. But what she presented this morning, I had no understanding of or awareness of until really basically she gave it. And that's why I was saying I was confused. That's all. You did try and tell us all the sides as far as the litigation was concerned. I didn't want to leave that impression that you didn't.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mayor Tobler?
Yes. Mr. Snow, when was this emailed to us that went over everything that you just talked about? I thought we've had this a couple of days. Was that yesterday?
That was emailed, I believe, Tuesday evening.
Okay, so we have had basically what you just went over the last couple of days to kind of sort through that. I'm just a little confused why you say you were unaware of the arguments when we've had this, because we have.
Maybe it went into, what is it that it goes into in our office? Spam. But I'm telling you the truth. I don't know what happened, but I became aware of the existence of some of this work late yesterday, and I became aware of it through Mr. Brown. I did not have a copy, and that's why I'm saying this now. I have no idea what happens electronically and all these things, but I did not get it. I can tell you that because my whole staff is alert to this.
Mr. Chair, I wasn't throwing that out to make anyone look bad. I just wanted to go on the record that we have had these arguments for us to review the last few days, and whether everybody got them or not, I can't say that. But we also got the protest prior, stating all these arguments as well. So
Weeks ago.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. I'll take this opportunity to throw out a comment for future RFPs. 4 or 5 p.m. on Tuesday evening. I know at the county we had an all-day county commission meeting, we had a Clean Water Coalition meeting, and then there was a meeting from 6 to 8 after that. So the 24 hours on that piece, and then the Lionel Sawyer came in sometime Tuesday or maybe Wednesday to our emails or hand-delivered. And that has been reflective, and my point being, that has been reflective all the way back for the last 2 or 3 meetings. It seems like, for instance, Mr. Aguero's presentation, which I thought was critically important from my perspective to hear him talk about the economics. And yet we received that through no fault of his own. He was up in Carson City. But we received that the day before, even perhaps the night before the hearing. And to do our due diligence and our responsibilities as a board, it's very difficult. Speaking only for myself, I read the 2 opinions last night side by side, but the night before is probably not the appropriate planning to offer a policy decision. So I agree with the statements made. At the same time, we as an agency need to create a process or tweak the existing process where there's ample time frames. And I know there's some legal questions as far as timely waivers and all that, but I think it'd be prudent if we take a look at the overall process to give us a better handle on being able to receive a document in time to then go back to you, Jacob, or to the applicants or the protestants. So there's far more interaction than the night before or 24 hours before. I just don't think that's fair to the commission, especially when you're dealing with such complex legal issues. Again, from my perspective, it's far beyond my ability to go into references to federal law. But the opportunity to question what that means, I think, would be important in the future as we look to the RFP process.
Well, Mr. Chairman, can I ask this question? It makes me think, when was this information provided to both legal counsels? How long have they had this information that these 2 folks have just presented to us?
I can't answer that question. I can tell the commission that as soon as we received whatever the reports were, whether they were Veolia's protest, whether they were the response from First Transit to Veolia's protest, or whether it was the general counsel and special counsel's recommendations to the commission, we transferred those immediately as soon as we had them. As to when they had them, I can't answer that question, but I believe it was expeditiously transmitted to me, and I expeditiously transmitted that to the board, and maybe I should have done so earlier or anticipated in the process more time. Didn't know when the documents were going to come in.
Mr. Chairman, if I can, in further clarification to Councilman Ross's question, with regard to the vote issue, I had shared my legal opinion with both parties a significant amount of time ago, long before they even filed their protest. Yes. Well, the subsequent issues, we had just recently completed going through all that, so it was a timely process, and as soon as it was available, it was shared.
Mr. Chairman, do you want an answer to that question?
To a specific question as far as when it was transmitted.
Mr. Joseph got it last night around 8:30, and he transmitted it to us shortly after that. So we got it late last night.
Does First Transit want the opportunity to answer that question when they received it?
Pete Gibson, responding to that specific question, late yesterday afternoon.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I think if there are no further questions or comments from the board at this time, Mr. Woodman has some concluding remarks, and then I'm ready to make my recommendation if it's the pleasure of the board.
And excuse me just for a sec. Commissioner June Kiliani?
Thank you. So we had a late afternoon and a late evening?
I can clarify that. I sent it out at the same time yesterday evening, about 6:30,
Okay.
to both First Transit and to Veolia.
All right, just so that it's clear, that because otherwise I would have had a concern about the timing of it. Thank you.
And procedurally, after Kent's comments, I would like to have the two companies put something on the record before your closing remarks, Jacob.
And just to clarify one thing, Councilman, we have been advising throughout this procurement process and have been advising the RTC for about 20 years, so it's not, we weren't just brought in the last few days. There's been a compressed time period here. We got the protest. We worked with Zev and provided a response, and then Lionel Sawyer provided their response, and that has all happened in a condensed period.
If I may, Mr. Chairman.
Councilman.
And I see that. I'm actually looking back to see when I've gotten all this information, and you've sent us a ton of information.
Yes,
and I understand that, and I'm not no disrespect to you guys, but I think it's fair that once you have this information, or the RTC has this information, certainly we as commissioners get this information and have had time to digest it. I'm going to concur with Commissioner Brown's thoughts in regards to getting that to us as timely as possible, but likewise with the parties that are interested in a timely fashion, and that's just my comments. I'm just going back to my briefing with staff, and Councilman, you were with me in regards to the things we discussed. This was not part of that. So, you know, and Mayor Tobler, you're right. I mean, if it's gotten to us, it's gotten to us. If I haven't had time to read it yet, shame on me.
That wasn't my point, but.
And Mr. Chairman, not to belabor this, but just as is indicated by Jane and Zev's review, based on the overall legal analysis, we don't see any alleged flaw or issue in the First Transit proposal or in the way the procurement was conducted that would provide any basis for rejecting the First Transit proposal or for overturning the recommendation. And somewhat more importantly, the various arguments about redoing the evaluation or discounting First Transit's score or increasing Veolia's score, all of those are contrary to the way the RFP was set up months ago. Everyone in the transit industry knew what the rules of the game were. We played by those rules, and we can't now make any of those changes, or it would be a very clear violation of all the federal procurement requirements and any standard procurement principle as to how you conduct an RFP.
Thank you.
I've got a question about that.
All right, Councilman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Okay, so you're telling us we can't change anything or we're going to violate federal law?
Once you issue an RFP, then you're laying out all the ground rules. Here's how this game is going to be played. Here's how I'm going to evaluate technical, here's how I'm going to evaluate price, and here's how much each of them counts. During the procurement process, before proposals come in, if you said, hey, we really would like to do this slightly different, you can issue an addendum. And you can say, well, maybe we ought to put in another factor, or maybe we ought to do this. As long as that's done before proposals come in, everyone in the industry and all the proposed bidders know that, and you've got an equal playing field. Once the proposals come in, the game is on the evaluation factors is pretty much closed. Because if you didn't do that, it would be ripe for abuse, because you'd say, hey, I looked at this, and if I kind of slant this a little bit, this guy does better. So the evaluation factors are locked up. And you cannot, at a later point in time, say, well, it really should have been done this way. Even if on a rational basis you think, hey, that really makes more sense. Why didn't we do it that way? Next time you can, but you can't do it that way in this procurement.
Okay, through the chair, if I can. Then to simplify this in my mind, what if we don't like the prices from anybody? What if we don't like the price we got, whether it's low, high, or in the middle?
Then you always have the discretion to reject them all.
Okay, that is our discretion without violating any federal
Right.
laws
Yeah, you can,
with the FTA.
Yes, you can reject them all for the sound business reason that you think the prices are unreasonable and go out for a new procurement.
Now, that's a totally different action. You're not
Okay.
changing anything. You're exercising your discretion as the final official.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Giunciliani.
Thank you. Then, do we hold pre-conference meetings on the RFP?
Yes, in fact, in this case, we did more than we normally do. We actually had industry meetings where we invited all the industry in and took input to try and determine what would be the proper elements of this RFP. Yeah, and then it was almost like a peer review.
Okay, so who made the decision of a 55-45 split on how we were going to weight?
I did,
Okay. And is that how we've done it in the past?
yes.
And,
No, actually, Commissioner, no. In the past, price has been a lower factor as part of the percentage. It had never been more than 50%. I believe the rationale, I mean, Jacob can tell you this, but I believe the rationale was in light of the current budget situation, everyone thought price was the most important element this time.
And I'm sorry, I misunderstood the question, Commissioner. I thought you were asking who has made that determination on the percentages each time.
and you've always made that determination
I have.
as the general manager. Have we ever had a local hire, minority hire component of RFPs?
We don't have we have the DBE requirements that they have to satisfy under federal law, but because there's federal money in this system, we have to follow the federal requirements, and we can't put the local preference that we can on other purely locally funded contracts.
And then, if I might, to the gentleman there, then from the FTA's perspective, they don't permit us other than just having the standard DBE language?
No, they have they allow standard DBE requirements, and it's actually a somewhat controversial subject because there are a lot of communities around, particularly in this kind of economic climate, who would like to have a local preference, some kind of local hiring requirement. There's a lot of policy reasons to do that. The FTA so far has stood fast and said it's a violation of federal law. I think at some point they might try to reconsider that, but I've had that issue come up in other communities
At some point,
recently.
could someone just provide us what that federal law is that they seem to think the local preference hiring would apply to?
They believe, and again, I don't really endorse their opinion, but they
Right.
believe that it is an unlawful procurement practice to have a local hiring because it would narrow and exclude firms from bidding. And that's been their position.
Is
for a
that their
number of
position
years.
on whether there's a veterans hiring component or?
Again, they are not, in my view, intellectually clean on all of those issues. They allow project labor agreements, which can be a type of local hiring.
Right.
So, but their position has been pretty adamant that local hiring is impermissible.
Okay. And then along those lines, are we precluded from requiring whatever company is selected from at least creating a baseline of who they're hiring, so at least we know what floor they have as far as minority and women-owned companies that are within there? Similar to what we do with NDOT, that was a statute that I passed in '05, and that NDOT's actually done a much better job than I even envisioned. And I'm just curious if that's something we could request of whatever company is
Just as an
selected.
information matter?
Yes.
I don't see that.
I think you have to have a baseline to know who's hiring whom, and then therefore if they're succeeding, not just on DBE, but just in outreach.
That I think we can clearly do to gather the information. We can't make it a mandatory requirement that they actually hire the people, but we can certainly track
Ethnicities and race and women, okay. Did our staff ever, in its consideration of going out to bid, look at the issue of that we would be creating a monopoly?
We didn't specifically look at the issue of would we be creating a monopoly. We do have to have an open procurement, however. And since 1994, we had the incumbent original contractor providing both paratransit and fixed route service until I think it was about 2002. And then at that point in time, the commission elected to go with Laidlaw Transportation for the first transit contract. And ever since, there's been a split between the two.
And at that time, was that through an RFP or just simply a procurement?
It's an RFP.
It was an RFP. And in your mind, does the FTA prohibit or have discouragements of monopolies within this area?
Actually, FTA would not allow you to put any restriction on anyone bidding. So even if someone had another contract locally, you can't block them from bidding on a second contract.
Okay.
So their rule is maximum open competition. Everyone gets to bid.
And did we have 3 bidders originally?
Yes, there was originally 3 proposals.
And one just decided they did not have the capability, or?
No, in the evaluation process, the original proposals were scored on technical score. Then when we went to the BAFO process, the determination is if someone can improve their score significantly enough to be competitive in the BAFO, they move forward to that process. The determination was that that company, even though their price actually was in between the 2 final proponents, and I don't recall the exact amount, it may have been slightly closer to the lower price from First Transit, but it was determined they could not have improved their score significantly enough on the technical score in the BAFO process to have been competitive, so they were dropped out of the competitive range.
Thank you. Could you briefly explain for the general purpose, what is a BAFO process?
A BAFO is really a second round of proposals, and it's the best and final offer is what it stands for.
So the general acronym.
Yes.
And then, I apologize. What, in your mind, is the difference between a bid and an RFP?
A bid is normally strictly based on price, and you have to have a specific parameters of what everyone's going to submit their price based on, and you take, depending on the nature of what it is you're seeking, either the highest price or the lowest price. So it has to be the best price.
So it has to be the best price. So the 1 to 30, for example, that was mentioned in for vehicles, did we call that out in our RFP, and that's what they were to match their pricing to?
We specifically asked both proposers in submitting their best and final offers to use that ratio. So both proposers
both or all 3 at that point?
At that point, it was just both.
Because it was best and final offer stage.
Okay, that's what I have for now. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
And to follow up, Commissioner, the Lionel Sawyer correspondence did a nice job distinguishing between an RFP and a bid, invitation to bid, I think was the reference. Taking advantage of a comment made earlier, and I think some of the county has done it and some of the cities are doing it, although we can't mandate local hiring. In
our federally funded related projects.
But even in those, is it legal, and if we need to do research on this, to put in there strong recommending language, as not as a criteria that would be evaluated plus or minus, but the governing body wishes to see, some.
I think we can do things like that without having an actual requirement. Yeah. Absolutely.
But I think that at least puts in mind, and we're starting to see it on some of our responses to Public Works, we're starting to see the contractors and the respondents be far more aggressive in acknowledging that it's the policy of the governing board to.
You encourage that contractors engage as much local participation as possible. Yeah, I think you can make a policy statement like that.
Okay, we're going to
Mr. Chairman?
Yeah.
I hate to say this, but I'm going to bring up a point of order.
Point of order.
I believe that under the process, I need to actually give the board my recommendation, if that would be all right.
Okay, that's fine.
I have, under the RFP, I have a responsibility to look at the process and look at and analyze the protest. And I have seen and gone through the Veolia protest. I've also seen the response from First Transit, and I have seen our special counsel and as it has gone through our general counsel's response and their advice. However, I'm giving my own recommendation to the Commission that the process was sound, fair, and legal, and it's my recommendation that the Commission deny all aspects of the protest. Thank you.
Thank you. So we're going to have the two companies put whatever they need on the record specifically to Mr. Snow's recommendation. I think we're addressing on this agenda item the protest. So should we flip a coin, or does anybody want to start? And I would respectfully ask that the comments be directed to the public record in regards to the protest. Unless it's the will of the board, I don't think we want to hear any rebuttal comments to the respective records. But it didn't work last time, but I'm going to once again take out my handy-dandy timer and just we'll start by allowing the senator and the team the appropriate time they feel needed.
Mr. Chairman and members of the Commission, for the record, my name is Richard Bryan with the law firm of Lionel Sawyer and Collins, and it's been our privilege to represent First Transit. Mr. Chairman, you and Commissioner Chris Giunciliani have heard plenty from me this week, and I think you probably would prefer to hear very little. And so I will defer now to my colleague, Fred D. Pete Gibson III. Although this is his maiden voyage in appearing before this commission, he has been, and his family has been, a part of Southern Nevada since the memory of man runneth not to the contrary. And that's a long time for those of you who are not lawyers. I was privileged to know his grandfather, who took a leading role in the development, as Councilman March may be interested, in the development of the Henderson Industrial Complex on the eve of World War II, and his father is still very active in the community. Pete's been a member of the Nevada Bar since 1977, and although my name appears on this, he is the primary author of our response. And with your permission, Mr. Chairman, let me defer to an able lawyer to present our case.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Senator, for those kind words.
Although, Mr. Gibson, I do want to acknowledge for the record that the senator's name was the first signature on the letter.
As it should be. Good morning. I very much appreciate the opportunity to appear before you today. I am, of course, a Nevada lawyer, and I am a litigator. So I'm going to take a bit of approach in making a record today rather than really deal with the substantive points that staff has already discussed with you all. And the first question that I have is I'm concerned about comments from various commissioners on the level of preparation for today's decision. And so I think it's important for the record that if Mr. Chairman and the commissioners feel unprepared or uncomfortable in proceeding today, that we put it on the record. And secondly, if you do feel comfortable and prepared to proceed, that we put that affirmatively on the record.
Mr. Chairman, may I make a comment to that? Mr. Gibson, if you're referring to my comments, I'm absolutely prepared to move forward today. Thank you.
Thank you. First, reacting on the, to the record point about the opinion of your outside counsel. That opinion and report and recommendation is a public record and has now been discussed publicly. It does reference, in many instances, our response to the protest and, in fact, quotes from it. For the record, I incorporate it into our response, reference it specifically. I agree with its contents, comments, observations, citations, and analysis. So if there's any question whether that report and recommendation can be properly considered should there be a litigation evaluation, I want it to be clear that it is to be considered on the record as part of our response. It's useful to go back to remind everyone about the procedure that puts us here today. At the start of the May 19th meeting, counsel expressed his opinion as to how the vote should proceed for that hearing. The hearing was then conducted and actions were taken. At the time, the opinion with respect to the vote was given by Commission counsel. There was no objection or question raised by Veolia's counsel with respect to it. And that's particularly important in the context that the first motion that was proposed with respect to the contract was to reject the recommendation of the staff and let the contract to Veolia. Clearly, I think a fair inference is that Veolia was hoping to get a 4 vote on that motion. I don't think they would have stood up and said, oh no, we have to have 5. So that proceeded throughout the meeting. The vote was taken, the contract was let. There wasn't a request for reconsideration or a point of order seeking that reconsideration be discussed on the basis that you were just wasting your time because a 4 vote was legally invalid. That's important because things then progressed with respect to the processing of that contract as they had to and as they did. Mr. Kempfer forwarded a letter to the RTC the next day following the vote, expressing his concerns about the voting process. Mr. Kaplan responded with a written opinion on behalf of the Commission in which he stated unequivocally the legal basis for his advice and his rejection of the, request for consideration by Mr. Kempfer. The protest is filed, our opposition is lodged, and then a report and recommendation is created, all of which deal with, at least in part, the 4 or 5 vote standard. Throughout this process, the Commission's own attorneys have had an opinion that has not wavered. There's been no equivocation about it. They've fully accepted the opportunity to consider another challenging position with respect to that opinion, but in face of that, they still are solid in their recommendation and expression of opinion as to what the prevailing and effective law is. Now, we've heard quite a bit of discussion about whether that opinion is sound. I think the authorities that have been presented make it clear that it is sound and is consistent with the policies and procedures and the actions of this Commission over many, many years. Rules of statutory construction in dealing with competing legislation clearly support the opinion that Mr. Kaplan has expressed in writing. One of the key factors that Mr. Kaplan noted is that you do have as a member a representative of an executive branch agency, clearly not an elected official and never intended to be an elected official. Commissioner March served for almost a year and a half as a commission member while not being an elected official. She was an appointed official. And again, no expression of concern or objections from those appearing that perhaps this issue was something that needed to be tended to. Most importantly, this is a dynamic process, and those involved in the process are entitled to rely upon the expressed opinions of this Commission. And we have conducted our business in full reliance on those opinions, and there's no dispute as to what those opinions are and how they were issued. But we come to this interesting, I think, point based on some of the comments that appear in the minutes and clearly in those arguments raised by Veolia. This Commission is not a court, and it's not a legislative body. As such, we believe that you are bound by the legal advice provided to you by your lawyers. These lawyers are not advocates for proposers or others competing for the public business. They are, in fact, lawyers for the public. And as such, they take their responsibilities seriously, and I think that without some compelling cause, such as a court order or some other direction, this Commission should stand by the legal advice that has been provided to it and been relied upon by the public for years and years. Quick comment on reconsideration, since that's one of the agenda items. I just remind the Commission that it would require a motion from an aye vote from the previous action. But it also requires a sound basis for proposing reconsideration. It's our belief there is no sound basis for such, absent the Commission affirmatively accepting the protest. Absent an affirmative acceptance of the protest, then reconsideration cannot be undertaken. And I think that's cornerstone to the procedure that you all be considering going forward. Finally, prevailing proposers do have rights. They're set forward in contract, set forward in precedent, set forward in common sense. One of those rights is to the due process of law. As I said, this is a dynamic process in this procurement. A notice of award has been issued. The company has fully complied with its document productions in order to satisfy the criterion of the notice of award. All that remains to be done is the notice to proceed and an execution of the already signed contract. Those are not discretionary matters. Those are simply administrative functions. And so we've come this far in the process, and it's our position that for all the reasons stated in our opposition, the protest should be denied.
Thank you, Mr. Gibson. Are there questions at the current time for Mr. Gibson? Okay. Is there anyone else? Please.
I'm sorry, if there were questions.
No. I don't see any at the current time.
Mr. Brown.
Councilwoman.
I would just like to make note that I don't believe in all instances of interpretation by lawyers that we are bound by their legal advice. I just wanted to say that because sometimes I have found it not to be accurate.
That's why it's called
Thank you.
advice.
Senator, anyone from First Transit, any additional speakers?
Mr. Chairman, you've been very patient, you and the members. I think you understand our position. We simply urge you to follow the legal advice of your counsel, the recommendation of the staff. That has served you well for nearly 3 decades that I am familiar with. There is no valid reason to depart from it now. Follow the recommendation and allow us to go forward and provide the service that we think we have honestly and fairly won in accordance with the procedures that have been outlined. And I thank each of you again for your patience with us.
Thank you. Representatives from Veolia?
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. I'm Chris Kemper here on behalf of Veolia Transportation. Also speaking will be Lee Roberts, who you heard from on a couple of occasions previously. A good lawyer is always concerned that he may not be good enough. That in a matter of extreme importance, where so much is on the line, he may not be good enough to convey persuasively what he knows to be the truth. And that is where I find myself, because I am afraid I may not be good enough to convey to you what I know is right. Just last night, we were provided the recommendation of denial with regard to our protest. Candidly, I did not have the time or the energy at 9 o'clock when I ended up getting it to read it all. However, there is one particular issue of our protest to which my personal attention has been directed over the last 30 days. And that is the issue of the 4-3 vote that was taken by this board when the First Transit contract was approved. That is the only issue to which my attention has been directed. Mr. Roberts has some additional comments, but that is where I'm going. The Nevada statutes clearly provide that a public body, which the RTC is, you are a public body, in order to take any affirmative action, must have a vote of the majority of its members. Now, NRS 241-02 or 0355, 241-0355 states that where a public body is composed of elected officials only, that majority vote must be a vote of all members of the board and not just a vote of the majority of those present. With 8 members on this commission, under NRS 241-0355, a majority vote is 5, not 8. 5 of the 8, not 4. And NRS 241.036 provides that any vote taken in violation of that section is not voidable or reviewable, it is void. Absolutely, unequivocally, unquestionably void. It is of no legal force and effect whatsoever. Now, most of you, if not all of you, know how we got to 241-0355, why it was enacted in the first place, why it redefined the majority which all of us operated under. And I have been doing land use and administrative law for nearly 35 years, and I saw that councils and commissions with seven-member boards treated a majority as just those present. And throughout the 1990s, very important pieces of ordinances and actions were done with less than a majority of the entire board. We saw on 7-member boards, we saw votes of 3-1, 3-2, and on several cases, 2-1, because there were enough absences or abstentions to reduce the board actually to 3 people who were voting. So you had 7-member boards that had 2 people on those boards determining county and city policy. Well, in 2001, the Nevada legislature said, we are going to put a stop to that. Too many things are being decided with less than a majority of the boards participating. And with Senator Kerr and others, candidly, like the Assemblywoman Chris Giunciliani leading the way, SB 239 was passed. And it was codified into 241-0355. And it says, if you are a public body composed of elected officials only, a majority of the entire board is necessary to act, and not a majority of those present. So that appears clear enough. The RTC is a public body by statute. By statute specifically, and this is very important, by statute, state law, your board is comprised of 2 by the board, meaning the Board of County Commissioners, 2 by the governing body of the largest city in the county, which is obviously the city of Las Vegas, and 1 by the governing body of each additional city in the county. That's it. Now, the fact that Clark County on its own decided to say, we're going to put an ex officio non-voting member on your board doesn't mean that you can change state law. State law says your board consists of elected officials only. That's what the law says. But rather than just accept on its face the clear reading of the statute and what seems to be the obvious from that reading, the following is argued in written denial of our protest and in rejection of our majority vote argument. 1, the RTC was never intended to be part of SB 239. You were never intended to be part of that. But wait, if that doesn't work, 2, the RTC was excluded from 241-035 in 2009 when the RTC was codified together under 277A and you were allowed to create your organizations and meetings. And 3, since this member is a non-voting member but still a member of the board, you're no longer a board that's composed only of elected officials. And again, the county cannot change state law. And then finally, since a county commissioner or city council member may be appointed to fulfill an unexpired term on the commission or council, and then since that appointed member may serve on the RTC, all of a sudden the RTC is transformed now into a board that doesn't have elected members only. Those are the positions essentially offered in denial of the protest relating to the majority vote. Now, respectfully, if the RTC honestly, really believed that this ex officio member being on the board was in itself enough to make the 5-vote requirement not applicable, they would not have expended the energy they did in trying to change state law to allow that person to vote on your board. That effort failed, but it was nevertheless still attempted. Why? If it was so crystal clear that that ex officio member made this a board not governed by state law, why was there the effort to try to change that? Most respectfully and specifically regard to the final position, which you heard that since you can be appointed, you're no longer covered by the requirements of 241.0355. Is that really the position you want to take as a member of the RTC and as an elected official who serves not just on this board, but on your own city council or your own county commission? Are you going to take back to your county commission or your city council now that you don't have to comply with 241.0355 anymore? Because you can be appointed by the governor if somebody unfortunately passes away or has to resign and the governor or the city council appoints somebody else, that all of a sudden state law doesn't matter anymore? That can't be the message you want to send. We can't be saying we want to go back to where 3 or 4 or even 2 people could make policy in Clark County. So, I would ask you this. I'd ask you not to listen just to me, because I'm advocating a position. I'd ask you to listen to someone like Commissioner June Kiliani, who was there, who knows why the law was put in place. I'd ask you to listen to your own district attorneys and your city attorneys, who I know some of you have already contacted and asked, are we a board that's governed by 241.0355, and we are eliminated from that requirement because we have an appointed member. And I can tell you, I haven't spoken with them, but I can tell you that the answer is going to be no, you are still under that requirement. And you know why? Because each and every one of you recall that in order to reduce the number of board members, you have to get a letter from your district attorney or your city attorney saying that your abstention is a legal or ethical abstention recognized under the law. And your failure to do that leaves the board at its original number. So your attorneys universally recognize that the city councils and the county commissions are covered by 241.0355, regardless of the fact there may be an appointed member, and that applies to the RTC as well. And I cannot believe that we want to go back to that period of time where if, let's say, 3 of you were not able to make a meeting, and there was an important item to be considered, and there were only 5 of you here, that a vote of 3 of you, 3 out of 8 of you, could now determine policy in Clark County, Nevada, or for the whole state of Nevada. But, again, Why listen to me when we have something else of value? And I'd like to submit this for this record. It was not included, I understand, in what you have. This is our reply to the response that we got from Lionel Sawyer. And in it, without belittling Mr. Roberts' remarks, let's not.
Mr. Kempfer, let me stop you just for a moment. Let these be handed out. Now, what's being presented, is it in rebuttal to something that was submitted earlier?
Yes, it's in rebuttal to the Lionel Sawyer letter.
And I thought I had indicated earlier that I think this would be perhaps better left for a court of law, as Mr. Gibson pointed out. I would prefer that you keep your comments to what you have as far as Veolia's position on the protest, and I think you've done that.
Okay,
or if we open this up, out of fairness, I'm going to ask First Transit to come up and if they want to start a rebuttal process, but I don't think we want to go there.
The only thing I'd say, Mr. Chairman, is that this is part of your RFP process, which allows us to submit a reply to any response that we get from First Transit. This was submitted to the RTC. This has already been delivered to the RTC last night, actually prior to the time that we got their protest.
And Mr. Chairman, since
Senator,
everybody
please.
is building a record, for the record, we have not seen this document that Mr. Kemper is arguing. So.
All right.
Well, it's up to you as to whether you're not. I can introduce may I just indicate from whom it's.
Why don't you just indicate the reference to the letter, from whom, to whom, and then I'm going to ask First Transit if they want to respond to the introduction of this. And to my colleagues, please jump in if you feel the need.
This is a letter. Oh, I'm sorry.
If I might, Mr. Chair, just because the record is apparently being made, I think in your impassioned, you referenced the wrong bill number. You said SB 239. It's actually SB 245. So we should make sure that that's in the record.
239 related to 2410355. 245 relates to the RTC. So if I didn't.
And we should note both of those.
Yes.
All right. So, Mr. Kempfer, just introduce what's in your hand, and then I'm going to have Senator Bryan respond.
Actually, I've been told it's 329. So 329 and 245, all right? I got all of the numbers correct. The order is not correct, all right? Anyway, this is a letter from Senator Kerr, former Senator Terry Kerr, who was the author of SB 329, all right? And you need to read this letter because he says, wait a minute, okay, you don't want me to reference the letter.
The letter's been introduced as part of the public record.
Okay.
On the introduction of the letter.
I object for a couple of reasons. First, as we've heard, you're inundated with all sorts of information, and for us to have to deal with what amounts to a declaration of a witness without us having an opportunity to consider and respond to it, either with our own declaration or at least talk to Senator Kerr about how it came to be, I think is just unfair in the consideration process that you're undertaking. Secondly, since it is apparently Senator Kerr's opinion and recitation of historical information, I think it's untimely. This is really not in the form of a reply to legal argument. This is instead an offer of evidence in support of the protest itself. And I think the appropriate time to have raised it with us, with you, is at the protest time, and then give us an opportunity to provide rebuttal evidence as necessary. And so I urge you not to consider it in this process. It's obviously been introduced into the public record, but I don't think it's timely or appropriate to consider.
Your comments are placed into the public record, and we will leave it at that this document that's been presented is part of the public record today.
And just so we're clear, their response was June 6th. This letter is June 7th. So that seems to be a pretty timely response. But let's move on. All right? I am not your legal counsel, obviously. But I would have to ask you to please try to balance the pros and cons of what you are about to decide. It is a very important issue, as I say, from a presidential standpoint, whether you want this board from now on to be able to go forward with votes of 3 or 4 members instead of 5. So that's the first issue you have to decide. And then secondly, I want you to think about this. Balancing everything. You know Veolia has the contract until essentially October of this year. If you uphold our protest and determine that the vote is void, what happens? Nothing really. First Transit will take the issue to court, and during the 4 to 6 months while we wait for a court decision, Veolia will continue to operate just like they have, and they have the contract all the way to October, and they've already told the RTC if you need to extend it for months or month to month or months at a time, they're happy to do that. The employees will not be disrupted and nothing will change. If First Transit wins in court, then it can take over the operation as smoothly as it possibly can. The issue's decided. The employees now know where they're going. We're moving forward. And if First Transit loses in court, what happens? You do a new RFP. So you're back to, again, where you wanted to be. So there is no negatives like there are if you go the other way. Because on the other hand, if you deny the protest and determine the previous vote was valid, what happens? Well, quite a bit. Veolia takes the issue to court. There's that same 4 to 6 month period of time. What happens to our employees during that transition period of time? What happens to all the money that First Transit has to put in for the transition? What happens to the money for our demobilization? What happens to all of that? And you get to court, well, if we lose, nothing. But if we win in court, what happens? It's void. The contract is void as a matter of law, and you have to undo the whole thing again. And that will have an incredible toll on the employees who went from Veolia to perhaps First Transit, back to Veolia, and the costs that everyone would have to incur. Now, quite candidly, despite what your attorneys recommend, and Jacob, who I respect, recommends, you don't have to follow that recommendation if you, as thinking individuals, believe you don't want that precedent set about the vote. That if you want to say no, we as the RTC want to operate under state law, and we believe we're governed by state law. So we'd ask that you please follow the plain meaning of the statute, what we believe has been the historical reason why votes are based on a majority of the whole board, and respectfully, we'd ask you to uphold that portion of our protest relating to the fact that the 4-3 vote was void as a matter of law. Thank you.
Thank you. All right.
Mr. Roberts, I know, has some additional.
Understand, and we're trying to be equitable in our allocation of time. With all due respect to billable hours, Mr. Kemper, your presentation was twice as long as First Transit, so I would ask that your comments be brief, concise, to the agenda item before us.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I will do my best to make my record while being concise, but I would point out that because we did only receive the recommendation and the rationale for the recommendation last night at 6:43 p.m., there was no time to draft a written response. Obviously, my comments would be much shorter had I been able to make my record in writing prior to this hearing. I did request an extension of this agenda item from Mr. Snow last night, which he denied, so that I could make appropriate rebuttal and would not have to go through these items. And I apologize for taking the board's time, but I do feel I will touch these as quickly as I can, but I need to touch these items
Well, let me
to make my
retract
record,
that then.
Mr. Chairman.
Let me retract my statement as far as being brief and concise. For the public record, please take what you feel is appropriate.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. With regard to the supplemental submission, which was our rebuttal, which we were entitled to submit under the terms of the RFP last night, I would state for the record that that was sent to the board at 6:06 p.m., which was actually, the staff has had our rebuttal for longer than we've had staff's recommendation as far as preparing for today's hearing. The recommendation which we received last night, which is dated June 7th, is written, as I mentioned earlier in making my objections, by two lawyers from Washington, D.C. who are not admitted to the bar of the state. It is a legal recommendation directly to Mr. Snow. It's appropriate for this board to disregard this letter, this recommendation in its entirety, to the extent it opines on whether or not our protest is valid under Nevada law. Washington lawyers can opine on the FTA, but they cannot opine directly to their client on issues of Nevada law. It's entirely inappropriate. And this is not just an objection in form, but one in substance when you look at what the board has received from these lawyers. The lawyers advocate actively for the recommendation made by Mr. Snow. It's apparent from their letter and the rhetoric which they use that they are acting as advocates and not impartial advisors. They criticize Veolia for the fact that in its 28-page protest, it includes citation to only a handful of court cases. I would note to this board that in the 32-page recommendation full of legal citations, which you've gotten from your out-of-state lawyers, there's only one Nevada procurement case, which is the case that we rely upon, Orion. And they only cite it for the purpose of telling you why you should disregard it, based on a bunch of federal decisions. It's entirely inappropriate. Look through this recommendation, and you'll see a bunch of case citations, which appear to be court cases. And they have something called a B number, B, and then a bunch of numbers. Those are decisions from the General Accounting Office, not a court, deciding cases under federal regulation, which are not binding on this board. This document reflects a fundamental misunderstanding of Nevada procurement law, which binds this procurement. They talk about an RFP is not an IFB, and therefore the only Nevada decision on point which talks about material variations from the terms of an invitation to bid is not applicable. Well, the problem with that is this board, created by Clark County, falls under NRS 332, which is entitled Purchasing by Local Governments. That's what you are bound by. RTC has acknowledged that in this procurement that is governed by 332. Well, if you look at NRS 332 in the procurement process, you're required to use what's called an invitation to bid. That's what this is as a matter of Nevada law. But an invitation for bid, as defined by NRS 332, is not as restrictive as an IFB under federal law. You are entitled to consider factors other than price in your IFB. That's what NRS 332 says. But that doesn't mean you can disregard Nevada law and consider non-responsive proposals simply because you put request for proposal on the procurement. There is a statutory procedure called a request for proposal in Nevada law, but it's in NRS 333, which is applicable only to procurements by the state. And if this was a true request for proposal, as that term is defined by Nevada law, there would be an appeal to the Director of State Purchasing instead of to you. Regardless of what you call it, this is an IFB, and the law governing IFBs govern this procurement. In a two-step process, you can allow someone to become responsive by asking questions through the best and final offer process. But after best and final offers, and the final offer is submitted, by a proposer, by a bidder. If that final proposal is not responsive, you cannot accept it as a matter of Nevada law. Before I move on to some more specific grounds on the protest, I do want to address one follow-up issue. Mr. Kempfer talked to you extensively about the majority vote requirement. I will not repeat his discussion, but I do want to point out and address the waiver argument that has been raised. The vote was not void until after it was made. There was a quorum of 5 present. If the vote had achieved 5 affirmative votes, it would not have been void. It was possible before the vote was taken to have a valid action. It did not achieve a majority, and therefore it's inappropriate to take action on it. And the violation of state law does not occur until the board, after failing to achieve a majority, attempts to take action on that vote. And that's where state law kicks in and governs your action today. You cannot authorize staff to proceed with this contract without violating state law. And I would point out that under NRS 241.040, each member of a public body who attends a meeting of that public body where action is taken in violation of any provision of this chapter is guilty of a misdemeanor. This is a criminal offense. You have to consider this vote carefully. You have an opinion by Senator Kerr, the sponsor of this bill.
I object, Your Honor. That is not part of the record.
It actually has been made part of the record, Mr. Chairman, and it is before you. The sponsor of this bill has said it applies to the RTC. And even
Mr. Roberts, excuse me. Senator, your objection is noted for the record. I know we're in a quasi-judicial role. I'm getting very uncomfortable. So please, from a legal standpoint, do whatever you need to do to protect your respective records.
Well, the point I simply want to make, without being rude here, is that you indicated you're accepting it for the record, but it is certainly not before you to be considered. We've never had a chance to respond to it, as we pointed out. And that would be the most unfair position to place the party before you, who at this point is the prevailing party and who's won the contract.
I think that's fair, Mr. Roberts. The document's been introduced, but the board is not going to consider that document in this forum. So if that needs to be referenced at a later date in a different jurisdiction, so be it. But I would respectfully ask that you move on.
Mr. Chairman, with all due respect, the terms of the IFB, RFP, whatever you want to call it, allows us to make rebuttal. There are no time frames set forth. We provided this response in less than 2 days after receiving Lionel Sawyer and Collins' response to our protest. We are entitled, as a matter of due process and under the terms of the procurement, to present rebuttal. We did that prior to this hearing. Receipt is acknowledged by Mr. Snow, and it will be a denial of due process not to allow us to comment and have the board consider these items as part of these proceedings. And if Lionel Sawyer and Collins doesn't believe they're prepared to respond to this submission, we would consent to have this continue to the next agenda item, because we already have stated for the record that we need that continuance in order to properly rebut all of the multiple issues raised by your out-of-state counsel and by lawyer Lionel Sawyer and Collins.
If I may put on hold for a moment.
Mr. Chairman, under your procurement, it was purely discretionary with the RTC whether to allow any further rebuttal or any meetings or delays. And the general manager, I believe, responded last night saying he would not consider any further rebuttals or submittals to the RTC.
The discretion of the RTC?
The RTC. So if this board would now like to decide to do something differently, that's your prerogative.
Okay. The discretion of the RTC, is that in reference to this board, or is that in reference to the general manager, or both?
I think it's in reference to both. Jacob made a determination in making his recommendation and findings that he wasn't going to consider anything else. It says the RTC. I believe this board can choose to do whatever it so desires as the policy-making body.
And hypothetically, if the board acts on that discretion and it ends up a 4-3 vote or 4-4 vote,
Well, today with 8 members present, it would require a 5 vote.
5. Okay. Commissioner June Kiliani.
I'd also point out if it winds up as a tie, the state law requires that it has to be postponed or a new meeting would have to be established under 241.
And I know we're bound by legal advice, but sometimes we're bound by former legislators' advice.
Actually, for the record, you should know that legally, an opinion of any individual legislator has absolutely no weight in a court of law.
With all due respect to Commissioner June Kiliani.
With all due respect to our former senator. That is only the individual opinion. It is not a matter of legislative intent or legislative history.
And I was offering it solely by reading the statute that said in case we get into a tie, we got another section that comes into play.
Mr. Kaplan, I have the privilege of sitting next to Commissioner June Kiliani a couple times a month, so be careful. All right, and First Transit, start contemplating the issue that's before us as far as Senator Kerr's letter. I'm going to ask you to make some comments after this. Please. Mr. Roberts, continue.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Touching briefly on several of our significant grounds of protest, Mr. Chairman, I believe that the recommendation from counsel has a fundamental misunderstanding of the arguments that we're making based on the review of prices and the scoring of proposals. The letter from Mr. Aguero, which was considered at the last meeting, makes it clear that if you can make certain assumptions, the price difference is not as great as it may seem. He states that if you make certain assumptions with regard to cost and that you aren't going to be able to renegotiate the collective bargaining agreement and cut wages and benefits, that maybe the difference is only $4.2 million. But that's $4.2 million over 3 years.
To be rude, I'm going to object. This was strictly on the protest, not on the merits of whether or not our bid was $49 million
Senator,
less, as they believe.
You, Mr. Roberts, from my perspective, you are verbalizing what is in front of us in writing, and First Transit in their correspondence has addressed these issues. So I think, again, perhaps this forum is not the place to decide what on merit or what's right or what's wrong. As long as you're making your record, you can certainly reference the correspondence, but I don't think getting back to issues that were raised or discussed at last meeting. So if you want to reference something.
The analysis of this price issue is one of the bases of our protest, Mr. Chairman.
And that was included in the correspondence.
It was included in the correspondence, but the thing that I want to emphasize that seems to have been lost on council is that Mr. Aguero even indicated that if certain of our revenue guarantees and capital investments were included and other assumptions that we made in our innovative proposals, we could be $11.5 million lower cost.
And I think that was referenced in the letter, but we're going to try to, again, move back towards Mr. Snow's recommendation on the protest.
The recommendation on the protest is defective because it relies on the assumption that Veolia had to object to the consideration of alternative proposals at the time the RFP was issued and not after the recommendation was made on award. The problem with that is that nowhere in the RFP was it disclosed that the alternative proposals, even alternative proposals that could swing this thing by $60 million, would only be weighted as 2.5% of the total score. No one knew that until bids were opened. No one knew that. So going forward with an award is not in the best interest of the county. And even though you have heard lawyers opining that you can't change the factors and you cannot award to Veolia, you have heard no one say in this hearing or any time prior to this hearing that it would be inappropriate or illegal for you to cancel this procurement because you now realize that the result of the evaluation factors you used did not result in the best value to the county, even if you consider everything which First Transit claims to be true. This board should reject all bids and move on to a new procurement, which is truly in the best interest of the county and which will provide the best price to the county. And, Mr. Chairman, in fairness, the points that I wish to elaborate on are points that have been at least touched on in our paperwork, but I do have rebuttal to offer to some of the specific instances raised by counsel. If you would prefer that I not get into that.
I would prefer you not get into that, but I do want to acknowledge and protect. Zev, help me out with any legal language. Protect your right to go in further detail or in more comprehensive presentation in a different forum.
Thank you, and I'd be happy to address any questions the board has as to specific issues raised by counsel if you've actually had time to review that 32-page memorandum.
And if I could, again, Mr. Roberts, pardon the interruption. Am I allowing, if this moves beyond the commission level, the freedom to raise some issues that I don't think are appropriate? No. Do you understand what I'm asking?
Yeah, everything you have before you has been submitted in writing. You're just hearing argument by counsel from all sides as to their interpretation of what their written presentation was. It's your discretion whether you want to cut that off and what you want to hear. The record is in all the written documents, and certainly that public record could be transmitted to a court if that's where we go.
And I think the argument is better held in a court of law. So that, again, deferring to my colleagues, I would prefer that detail and elaboration and argument to be left to a court of law.
Thank you. There is one matter which has not been raised in our papers, and I raise this with reluctance but feel compelled to do so. Mr. Kempfer has pointed out that RTC staff attempted to make changes to the makeup of this board and have legislation passed which would change the voting membership, the effect of which may have been to manufacture a fifth vote in order to proceed with his recommendation. Under the terms of the RFP, the people making recommendations to this board are required to have no conflicts of interest and act impartially. They are not permitted to advocate to third parties to achieve a result before this board. The actions of staff in advocating to the General Assembly and trying to change the vote in order to change the outcome of these proceedings stepped outside of the bounds of impartial advisor to the board and into the role of advocate and created an irreconcilable conflict of interest. And for that reason, it would be inappropriate to act upon recommendation by the general manager in this matter, and an independent advice should be given to this board, especially on the issues related to the recommendation you received this morning. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. First, Trent, and we're going to respond to that. Believe me, we're going to respond to that.
And I, with apologies again to the chair for time, I am not the last speaker for Veolia. There are very brief remarks from one additional gentleman to address purely FTA issues. He's not a Nevada lawyer, but we have here today Mr. Sev Miller, former chief counsel for the FTA, who will only address FTA issues which have come before this board in a very, very brief manner.
Mr. Gibson, with your permission,
thank you, Mr. Chairman.
We're going to allow Veolia to finish their presentation.
okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Sev Miller. I was Chief Counsel at the Federal Transit Administration, as was Mr. Woodman. And in fact, I was the acting administrator, as was Mr. Woodman, on several occasions, including my very first day in the office, which scared me to no end. Technically, everybody else was out of the building, so I was the acting administrator. I was asked to address today just one simple issue, and that is potentially it appears that there's some possibility that RTC would want to extend the Veolia contract while other things work out, whether that's a new procurement or legal matters or whatever. And there had been a sort of a rumor floating that FTA would look very carefully at that and would come down hard on RTC if there were some sort of extension of the contract. And I expect Mr. Woodman would agree, but the answer is that a reasonable extension with justification from RTC is not something that raises hackles at FTA. It's not something that FTA second guesses. An unreasonable extension that's not justified obviously would raise flags. But I think in this particular case, to the extent that that's been an issue in anybody's minds, it should not be. That's all I have to say.
Thank you, Mr. Miller, for your brevity.
Thank you.
It's welcome. And
I'll do my best to equal it.
You, Mr. Gibson, with all due respect, you take whatever time you need as far as representing First Transit.
Thank you. And I did try and live up to the admonition to keep it concise the first go-around. I know, Mr. Chairman, you expressed questions about this letter that has been given to you this morning, which is dated June 8th. First, it's hard for me to figure out, as a litigator, just what this...
I'm sorry, Mr. Gibson, which letter?
The letter from Senator Kerr that was handed to you this morning.
Thank you.
As a litigator, it's hard for me to figure out what this letter really represents. Senator Kerr is a lawyer. And so in one instance, I look at it and I think, it sounds like Senator Kerr has now joined the team for Veolia and is proposing an argument on their behalf. As a former legislator, I'm sure Senator Kerr knows that the legislative record on the intent of legislation is confined to the statement of legislative intent in the record. And individual legislators are not opining about what they really meant or wanted in expectation of binding somebody to that thought or idea. It's simply for information purposes, but it's not compelling to the extent that it's being offered as an expert witness statement. We haven't really been able to figure out how to qualify Senator Kerr as an expert on the issues that we've got, excuse me, presented for us. So those are my comments for the record about the nature and use of that particular exhibit. I'm concerned about the approach that's been taken to create what I call a specter of fear about what will happen if Veolia's position is not accepted. It's almost like the end of the world. For example, suggesting that you're all subject to criminal prosecution if you don't accept Veolia's position is a bit disturbing. Same is true as if you would revert to handling significant issues and creating policy with 3 members present. I don't think that that's ever been the action or intent of this board and wouldn't be going forward. The fact that chaos results if you live with the original vote that awarded the contract, I think that's pure speculation. First Transit's ready to go. They're ready to commit the money. Everybody says and agrees that they're fully capable of performing, and they're anxious to live by their commitment that they executed when they signed the contract. About courts. Well, we've heard that, at least I think I understood, that if you don't sustain Veolia's position, we're all going to get sued. And since I spend most of my time in court, okay, that's what it's for. And when you're dealing with clashes in statutory interpretation, that's the place where it needs to be considered. If you want to change your policies and procedures, don't do it at the end of a procurement. Do it next meeting so that the next round of RFPs will be clearly subject to an understanding about the vote that needs to be taken going forward. I can't speak to the last allegation, excuse me, of staff impropriety in legislative activity because we had no part in that. But I think it's a little late in the game to be bringing that up if you want to disqualify staff from giving you any advice or recommendations about this very important point. So with those comments in mind, my client's ready to go.
Thank you, Mr. Gibson. Is there anyone else wishing to speak from First Transit? Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to respond to that allegation that has been made. And while it is true that in the recent time frame we have been trying to effect changes in legislation that would put in place what the board's policies and procedures have been with regard to the director of the Nevada Department of Transportation, it's well established on the legislative record this session on numerous bills, even before we came to having anything to do with this procurement, that the RTC was trying to make these changes to put into effect on statute what we have in the RTC's policies and procedures, and to reflect the MPO, Metropolitan Planning Organization requirements in federal law. Not only is that well established on the legislative record, which your lobbyist, Brian Gresh, can tell you, this effort began in the 2009 legislative session. We went through a number of bills this session, Senator Schneider's bill on light rail, bills in Marilyn Kirkpatrick's committee, where we were discussing RTC-related issues, and we brought this language up. It was cleanup language from a 2009 legislative bill that, for whatever reason, and I think LCB would admit to this, it didn't make it into the 2009 RTC Act, even though we had provided, and we've tried every opportunity we have since then to get this language into effect into the statutes to reflect the requirements in federal law. And it's well established on the legislative record, and personally, I'm disappointed that they would come to that type of an accusation.
Mr. Chairman, if I could just add, as Mr. Snow related, in the 2009 session there was language similar to this. This was originally part of our draft for our bonding bill, which you all knew of and approved of. There were numerous elements to that. When the Water Authority took our bonding bill and had it amended to authorize them to do their own bonds and remove their sunset, all these other provisions for the RTC were dropped out. Throughout the entire, that was drafted last August, before this RFP even hit the street. And so throughout the session, we were constantly searching for other bills, as Mr. Gresh could confirm, where we could attach this other language, cleanup language. The specific language related to the RTC director being made a part of this board was to give this board the discretion to vote whether or not you wanted her as a full voting member of the board. It was not mandating it by the state. It was only going to give this board that discretion if you wanted that to happen. The MPO issue is a separate issue that is pursuant not to the county putting her on here. It is by state law. The governor of the state of Nevada in the RTC statutes is to designate an MPO pursuant to federal law. The governor has so designated historically the RTC as that MPO. He could pick another planning agency. He has historically picked the RTCs. And as such, there is an agreement between the state, the member entities of the RTC, and the RTC itself, which places the representative of the state, who's been designated as the NDOT director, to serve as an ex officio member of the RTC on MPO matters. She is not a member for other purposes and cannot vote for other purposes. Just so you have the records.
And I appreciate those comments, and I'll put my own comments. And I think it's perception versus reality. I was personally informed of this, I don't know the exact time, but Friday of last week. Talked to the general manager and asked that we withdraw our advocacy, not so much on the merits of the bill or the intent, but certainly the perception of the timing. So make it clear that I don't think with any ill intent, backed off that legislation for the purpose of the public perception. Okay. Now, I'm going to open it up for comments, but I just want to first address that the motion on the floor, the recommendation from the general manager is to, I'm sorry, not the motion on the floor. The recommendation from the general manager is to deny the protest.
That's correct.
That's correct. Okay. With that recommendation, then we'll open it up for some board comments.
Mr. Chairman.
Councilman.
Thank you. Mr. Gibson, Mr. Kempfer, and all the other attorneys in here, and no disrespect, but Mr. Gibson made a comment. You know, I'm listening to all of this, and it just makes me think about, you know, we're here to affect the common good of this community and this commission. There may be too many lawyers in this room and not enough bus drivers and bus riders in this room today. Thank you. And I've got to tell you, my position has not changed from the last time we talked about this during the last vote. It doesn't matter how many lawyers are in the room or how the paperwork came about or the RFP came down or the protest to me, and I must say this to Mr. Aguero and Mr. Hobbs, you guys have done a fabulous job presenting us with the information certainly I needed to make my decisions in respect to this. At the end of the day, we are trying to provide the best service at the best price to the people of this valley. And all the legal issues, and again, thank you for all that. A little much for me, but thank you for all that. It comes down to common sense for me. And it still comes down to price for me in regards to this RFP. We've got a price up here, and we've got a price down here, and I'm not convinced yet that this is apples to apples. I am convinced still it is apples to oranges, and I don't know what the discrepancy is, nor do I really care at this point, other than providing the best service in regards to public transportation in this valley to our citizens and our residents at the very best price. And I'm going to stand on that, and I'm going to continue to push for that. This is about the people who we represent, not about one company or another, and no disrespect to the companies. That's not the idea here. But there's a big gap. And my experience with RFPs in the construction industry is that when one price is this high and one price is this low, somebody missed something. Mr. Snow, this is just plain ugly, and I don't think it needed to get here to where we are today. Whether any of you take us to court for any reason that you want to, that's not what I'm here to do today. I'm here to represent the people in regards to transportation needs at the best price possible. And I don't see it. I don't see it on both sides. And until I do see it, I would still continue to support this being thrown out and starting from scratch.
One time only rule. Some of the faces were here last meeting. Other comments? Mayor Tobler.
I'm just kind of curious how this will play out. If the motion is that we deny it, or if we approve the protest and it's 4-4 and it dies, I guess what I'm concerned kind of goes back to Councilman Ross, and that is, you know, our concern should be towards the service to our communities. So we've approved a budget, and once again, how is this going to play out as far as service hours at this point? If we're going, apparently, if we go for litigation or whatever may happen, I guess I kind of want to know what's going to happen to our service levels at this point.
I don't know that I can answer that question, honestly. We just want to know, and I'll be honest, from the staff's perspective, to say that we are experiencing procurement fatigue would be an understatement. And I know that the board likely feels the same way, and the riders and the drivers, I think, are the ones that are suffering the most. And I responded last night in the request that I got from the email that I got from Mr. Roberts. I said, I think in the public interest, we need to go forward and try to make some sort of a decision so that we as your staff know who we have to do business with, because we have a major service change coming in September with addition of new services and the deletion of a lot of other services because of the problems with the paratransit budget in particular. I couldn't stand here and tell you an honest answer how the service levels are going to be performed. I can't tell you who's going to be performing them at this point. I don't know the answer to the question, and I'm sorry that I can't give you better information.
It's probably an unfair question. Just
No,
another.
But the other components, and I apologize for interrupting. Let's just clarify, if the recommendation from the general manager to deny the protest, if that does not attain, let's say that there's 8 members, 5, that is equivalent to a no vote?
Yes.
Which then would make the following 2 items moot.
Well, it could. I mean, arguably, on the next item, reconsideration, if a member of the majority, the 4 that voted for award, for some reason decided they wanted to bring it up and move to reconsider, they're still free to do so, even if the protest is denied or granted.
Okay, fair enough.
Okay, the other question I had is, as far as what was the the difference between the two contracts for the 3-year period? Was it 19 or so?
It's about $20 million for the 3-year period.
Okay.
Roughly.
And what's the size of the overall contract again?
It's about $85 million a year.
Okay, so I just wanted to put in perspective kind of what was stated before, that it was too far of a spread. And once again, I don't think I have changed my opinion on this either. I think we still have those analysis that were prepared for us. I am concerned where we're going to go with litigation. My ultimate concern goes back to those that we service with this, well, with the bus routes. And so I don't really have anything else to add other than I hope we can at least get something decided today as a board, so that service isn't heard in the future.
Thank you. Commissioner Giunciliani.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First, I want to state that I was incorrect as I was reading the statute, the NRS 241. If you go to Section 3, it reverts to 244. Not only in regard to the postponement or a tie on a vote, tie vote. That doesn't apply to the RTC board. That said, I do still believe that it requires a 5-person vote based on 241 on the previous section. And that's the unfortunate part, because I don't know where we're going to wind up today on that matter. I agree with Councilman Ross, though, that I think we should have taken a breath and stepped back and taken a look at how to make this not a monopoly or opportunity for many people to be able to provide a better service for our folks and some consistency for the people that work within the organization. I'm not prepared to change my vote either. I think everybody made the best decision that we could with the information that we had. It's unfortunate that everybody's lawyered up, so to speak. Nothing against lawyers, but it is unfortunate that it got into that play. In the long run, we can, I don't know what the motion, I mean, I have respect for Jacob, but I do agree with the chair. It is all about timing, and the perception that was out there was someone was trying to get some legislation passed and so I'm glad that was cleared up for the record as far as that was the intent, was from the 09 legislation. That said, an MPO is not a public body. Therefore, I still don't think if that portion is moot in my mind, and it's still this 8-member body that makes a decision, and I believe in state law, it's very clear that it's a 5-person vote because of the games that have been played in the past by local governments of having 2 and 3 and 4 people making a decision based on abstentions. That said, was wondering, Mr. Chair, is there a way to separate the recommendation from staff so at least we deal with whether or not our actions before may have been voided, and then look at the protest component as a separate issue? And I'm not sure how that would work, or if that would change anything. Don't know.
Repeat that again for me.
I believe staff's recommendation right now is to reject the protest. I believe included in that, though, is the vote that was taken last time, because that's part of the protest. And I'm wondering if we can split the question, so to speak.
It's your discretion how you rule on the protest. If you want to uphold certain issues and not others, that's your discretion as the board.
So I throw that out there for consideration. Okay.
We'll come back to that. Councilwoman March.
Thank you. Well, I agree. Best service and best price are the things that we really need to be considering, and serving our community and making sure that their needs are being met. And you raised some concerns about the discrepancies in the pricing, but there was also a third proposer who was probably somewhere in the middle. So we saw a real variety of proposals coming into RTC, and I think that my question more would be is why is Veolia's proposal so much higher? Because maybe we needed to do a forensic accounting and find out what the pricing has been and if they've been overcharging the RTC system over time. I have to ask that question. Right now we're considering whether to approve or to deny the bid protest, and so that takes me back to a question and one of the discussions earlier on about when this, and I don't know whether it's SB what or NRS what, but it goes back to the discussion that Senator Parks, apparently this was his bill, And in his bill, he talked about open meeting law, and this agency was specifically not cited in the list of agencies. Is that correct, Zev?
That's correct. There was actually it was Senator Kerr and Assemblyman Parks at the time, now Senator Parks, were the co-sponsors of the bill in the 2001 session. Senator Kerr had prepared a list for the chairman of the committee that heard it. I don't recall off the top of my head who that was at the time. And there was a 4-page list with 110 different governmental entities listed on that. And with his statement that this was the intent of who it would apply to, this is all in the legislative history and in the record. In the bill itself, LCB, as it was drafted and presented to the legislature, not only amended the open meeting law section, but amended each of those entities' statutory authorities to correlate to that, to changes so that they were now required to have a vote of the majority of their members. RTC is never mentioned in the draft in the bill. It was never mentioned in the list of agencies, and it was never mentioned in any of the hearings, the transcripts from any of the hearings.
Thank you. Well, you know, both of these companies are world-class companies, and either one of them can deliver this contract. There's no doubt in my mind. And I think that we're talking about money on the table, and as each one of our communities is looking at cuts, and we're looking at cuts to programming, and we're looking at cuts to service delivery and routes and all, you know, I would like to keep as many drivers employed as possible. And I'm concerned that even in the Veolia proposal, they talked about 100,000 service hours cut, which translates to 50 jobs. And so they were looking at making cuts. Is that my understanding? Is that a correct understanding?
Well, that would be a rough estimate that I would say order of magnitude somewhere. I've heard estimates of 80 jobs. I've heard, just based on our own rough assessment, when you've got 1,200 or so bus drivers and you're cutting the service hours by 5%, which is a 100,000 service hour cut, you would assume that there would be issues there that they only would have to deal with. They're either going to take it out of their profit, or they're going to have to have a reduction in force. And with their proposal that was under this RFP, there would have need to have been another 100,000 service hours cut if they would have been the successful company, and if the contract would have been awarded to them. I can't tell you how many jobs would have been cut, but that's just a rough order of magnitude guess. I've heard a number of estimates between 50 and 80 employees per 5% of cuts to service hours. Okay. But that would be a Veolia decision. They'd have to decide how they would deal with that.
Thank you. And clearly, there's no easy decision that's going to be made here today. This is certainly a challenge for all of us.
Can I just respond? Mr. Chairman, we have tried to be polite and courteous. Enough is enough.
Thank you, Senator.
From the lawyers and anybody else.
There were just two. No.
Close the public.
Mr. Joseph, we may entertain additional comments later, but right now the board's having a discussion. Thank you.
Okay. I'll conclude.
Are you done for now? Councilman Bennett.
I'm concerned. I want to ask a few questions. I'm concerned about the discrepancy that was mentioned by Councilman Ross. $85 million for 3 years. What is that, 255 approximately? If I'm doing the math right in my head. Approximately 20 million, it was the bid by First Transit was, just looking at the price component alone, was approximately $20 million less for that period of time, right?
Yes.
So in my head, again, doing the math, about 8%, is that the difference between the one bid and the other? An 8% give or take discrepancy, is that right? So I guess my question to staff is that we currently we're outbidding all kinds of projects, usually, I mean, not this large. But would it be normal or within the normal range when we bid a project out? Would we get an 8%, a 10% discrepancy between bidders?
Yes, that's fairly well established in our pattern.
Do we see 15, 20% right now, I mean, with pricing? We see that.
Yes.
That last year, yes, was from Dr. Fred O'Haney, for the record.
And that is correct.
Any other comments? Commissioner?
Thank you. In looking at the statute, though, it states specifically, a public body that is required to be composed of elected officials only may not take action by vote unless at least a majority of all members of the public body vote in favor of the action. Purposes of this section, a public body may not count an abstention as a vote in favor of an action. It subsequently goes on to define a public body. A public body means any administrative, advisory, executive, or legislative body of the state or local government which expends or disperses or is supported in whole or in part by tax revenue, or which advises or makes recommendation to any entity which expends or disperses or is supported in whole or in part by tax revenue, including but not limited to any board, commission, committee, subcommittee, or other subsidiary thereof, including an educational foundation. A public body does not include the legislature. So regardless of whatever list was provided in a public hearing, the statute will define. So if something was not mentioned, it's not a problem. It's how you define a public body within statute already. So, and that's usually offered as backup information rather than intent in law. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, a couple comments. Oh,
I just wanted to
I'm
say
sorry.
something if I could. Because I'm new on this, and I haven't had all the experience you've had, and I know you've worked the 9 months, excuse me, on this issue. And since I knew I was going to be an important vote, I've really tried hard to study all this. And there are certain things I think I have learned enough about that I could vote on today. If I were needing to choose between this entity or that entity, I would have to I would have to abstain. And that's because I don't have enough information. What I got yesterday, I tried to digest. I hear other things. I just do not have enough time if we're choosing between one group and another group. However, I do feel I could vote on the 5-vote, 4-vote, what counts as a majority, and that's because I had some experience when that was being put into law, and because I knew what the intent was, and because I knew, even before you said anything, Chris, that even if you have a list, that list doesn't determine forever, or as long as the law exists, who's going to be in it or who's not going to be in it, because there'll be new entities coming along that will be in it. And that's why, according to what you said, Chris, it's the body and how you determine that. So I could vote on that. I could not vote on the choice between the two groups. I want to tell you that I found both groups excellent in giving me information, very kind in offering that. I wish I had had more time to be able to meet with them, because you know, you get the information in, then you have to digest it before you know what questions to ask next. And that's when the time limitation hurt me the most. I found First Transit to be very professional when I met with them, and I appreciated that very much. I do want to note here on the record, however, that one of the things that happened through First Transit I did not think was right and was not professional, and that was, I can give you lists of telephone calls that have come into my office starting on Monday that have mired my office so we can't get anything else done. We have so many calls. And these are people calling in telling me it's about the RTC thing, and please call back. So I call the people back. I mean, that takes a lot of time to call these people back, and most of them don't even understand what this is about. They're calling back to say, well, you know what? We trust what you've done in the past. Take your vote and we support you. I mean, they were really kind calls, and I appreciated knowing I had that support, but it took the time away from government business, and that was very important. And then to have this passed out, which is make your voice heard, contact Councilwoman Lois Tarkanian, save $7 million a year at the polls. At the polls in my ward, and only in my ward, that was another problem that I didn't think was a very good thing to happen. I didn't think that was a professional way. Because if these people, if you had had neighborhood meetings, and you had given them information, and then they wanted to call or give me a petition or whatever, that I really respect, but not this type of thing where they didn't know what they were talking about, and I guess they signed petitions. So I don't know if you have a petition or anything, but I do want you to know that I have talked with people who have received it. It was given out by individuals who knew nothing about what this situation was, because the people that knew me asked the questions. So I have to ask your advice, Mr. Chairman, or somebody's advice here. I feel there are certain things I can vote on. I have enough knowledge. I would have to abstain from voting if we were going to vote on, are we selecting this group or that group? They were both excellent in many ways, and I was concerned about the labor situation. I was concerned what's going to happen. There were some labor problems with one of the groups, and more so than the other group, and I was looking those up, but I don't have enough time to be able to do research that well. And I've learned in government, we all become friends because we work together so much, and sometimes we support each other, and sometimes you have to come in if you're going to make a vote. You have to get your information independently too, and that's where I haven't had enough time to do that. So, Mr. Chairman, I'm telling you where I am and telling the rest of the committee also. And I don't know if I should just abstain totally or if I could vote on one thing and not the other, but if, it depends on how you break it up or if you don't break it up.
Okay. And thank you, Councilwoman. I don't think it's fair to put you in a position to go back over the year of history, not only serving on the RTC, but especially the last 60 to 90 days. I don't, even some of us here today, up until last night, we're learning information. So I don't think it's fair to put you in a position.
And Mr. Brown, could I just say, and how much money are we talking about totally, if you count all the years?
Well, it's a 595
Right.
million, let's call it with the one, was it 1% increase? So over $600 million contract. 3-year term and two-year.
And I had been told that, but I just wanted an emphasis here. This is what this vote is on. So that's why it's so critical, and you have to be so sure that the information you get is the best you can get. Thank you.
Well, I don't, maybe Zev, if you want to weigh in, but I think the councilwoman, if she feels that she needs to abstain, I think that's fair. If she wants to participate in the vote, I would ask your guidance as far as the appropriateness of that.
Based on the councilwoman's statements, if she feels that she has adequate information and wants to vote on a matter as a member of this commission, she's entitled to vote. If she's uncomfortable with her having sufficient information and wants to abstain, that's her discretion also.
Thank you. All right, I'll agree with my colleagues on somewhere in the last 60 to 90 days, we've lost sight of why the RTC is here and why we serve as board members, and that is, Mayor Tobler brought it up, Councilwoman and everyone, is serving the public. That's the mission of the RTC, and somewhere along the way, we've kind of lost that, and the focus has been taken away. I concur with the comments made that there's real concern, regardless of where this goes today or ultimately perhaps in court. We have to be very protective as a board and staff of the continuity in our service and the communication to our existing employees with Veolia, perhaps with First Transit and future employees. We have to, I think it's imperative that we communicate as much as we can to them to give them a sense of comfort as best possible, but the focus needs to get back to that service as quickly as possible. This process has been fluid, to say the least. I've tried to stay up to speed with staff, and Jacob and Zev are always very accommodating, but even our briefings have changed for appropriate reasons. We move in a direction and then we kind of back off. We move in another, we back off. And I have no problems where we've arrived today. But I question, why this process has been so fluid and complicated and controversial. And I think Councilwoman just brought it up. It's a $600 million contract. aren't too many of those floating around the country right now. And the zeal that both Veolia and First Transit have gone after this contract, it's expected. Be disappointed if it wasn't. And I would defend, I think these remarks were made at our last meeting by a few of my colleagues, I will defend what the RTC staff has done through this process. There's rumors, innuendos, perceptions, accusations, but I'm comfortable that the process that was set up was adhered to by staff. I think we all agree and have stated it publicly that we are the beneficiaries as a board of a great staff. Doesn't change anything. The RTC board, I mentioned this last meeting, and I'll say it again. I thought the May 19th meeting was as fair as a process as I've been involved with such a controversial issue. And I stand by that. I think there was a good public record made. I think everybody had an opportunity to make some comments. But to me, it comes down to we're going to have to resolve the 4-3 issue. I think that's fundamentally at the core. And with all due respect, and perhaps other issues that have been raised in the public record today may be resolved later on. But that 4-3 vote is the crux of my concern. I shared with Jacob last week, we had a sit down, a heart-to-heart, because he asked a very appropriate and very serious question. And I'll share this publicly, why my support was with Veolia. And I told him that it came down to a couple reasons. And you can switch Veolia with First Transit or anybody else that I've dealt with it in office over 14 years. I'm very loyal. And when we partner with the private sector and that partner accomplishes the things that Veolia has, they have my support. I am very supportive of going out for RFPs just to keep things clean and fresh. I think we've done that. But the loyalty was a key factor. Balance that against the apparent price differentials. And here's where I talked to Jake about, I think the term was tipping point. With both presentations, with Mr. Hobbs, Mr. Restrepo, and certainly Mr. Aguero, that presented me with some additional questions that I think went beyond the role as a board member. It would have been gone into the micromanagement of that evaluator. Were they biased? Why the anomalies that were raised? Why did we weight it at 100% on price and technical we didn't? Why the 45, 55%? Those are things that if I wanted to dive in, or any board member, I think we're crossing the boundaries down into the staff level. That's what you're paid for, you're professionals, that's what you do. When it reaches this level, I think we are obligated to challenge some of those recommendations. I think it's healthy public policy. Now, why did you feel that way? Why didn't we do that? But in a public forum with that recommendation. And everything I heard the 19th, I felt that the tipping point to award this contract to First Transit, in my mind, had not been reached. Now, that said, I want to state for the record, if the 4-3 issue is resolved and it is deemed legal, as we're recommending, then I will be the first one to congratulate First Transit and move forward. But I am not comfortable until that issue is resolved. That may be through litigation. I think perhaps we would anticipate that. And the other option that I'm going to put before the board is something that I talked to Zev briefly about before the meeting, and it speaks to a comment he made earlier. What's made this even more difficult is the fact that it's almost void as far as case law. This statute's been around for a decade, but there's nothing there. And it reminds me a little bit of the Clean Water Coalition, because we went out and challenged decades of practice at the state level just because they always did it that way, and there was no case law where a local jurisdiction challenged the state sovereignty. And when that decision was made, there were outstanding attorneys in Southern Nevada that disagreed. Some said it was a bad case, it's a loser. Some said, let's challenge it, there's some real constitutional issues. But the bottom line, the purpose that moved forward was to fill that void. Let's find out, let's get clarity at the state level on that issue. And I think we're here today. I think it's important. Well, I think Mr. Gibson brought up that perhaps we should just fix things moving forward. I agree with that. We've had some comments already today about things we can tweak with the RFP process. And if we could, someone wave the magic wand and make the decision that would stand up to all legal challenges, I'd support that right now, especially on the 4-3, because I think it was very fair. And I think all the colleagues spoke at the meeting indicating why they were voting the way they did, and that's strong public policy. I think that's great. But I'm concerned with that 4-3 issue, and I think it needs to be litigated. I talked to Zev beforehand that someone referenced it, and I don't think it was meant as a threat, but somewhere in that state statute, it says if, in fact, a 4-3 vote is taken, and it is someday indicated or soon to be indicated it's a violation, then we, unintentionally or not, abiding by counsel's opinion or not, we may be guilty of a misdemeanor. I don't think they're going to come and handcuff and take us away, but I think it's worthy of going directly to the Attorney General, and I don't know the official term, ask for a determination, or someone mentioned something earlier, if that would expedite the legal question of the 4-3. I was told beforehand if we ask for a determination from the AG on this issue, it still does not preclude someone, First Transit or Veolia, challenging it in the state court. But I'd like to start that process. And there's going to be a very critical issue, and I'll put it on the record now. I did not sign the contract, and I didn't even know the policies and procedures or the legal ramifications, but I was uncomfortable when that was brought to my attention. I don't want to sign this contract until the 4-3 vote is resolved. So I guess this is beyond the recommendation from the general manager, but I do want to reserve the right, if it's agended properly, to direct staff with the support of the board. So if I can defer that, am I allowed to do that, Zeb?
I'm not sure what you're deferring at this point.
I am going to ask that staff.
We seek an AG's
Opinion or determination, I'll leave that up to you, specifically on the 4-3 issue.
That can be an individual commissioner asking for that, or it can be the board in its entirety giving us direction to do so. We'd be more than happy to do so if that's the board's pleasure. Or if an individual commissioner wants to seek it, they're entitled to do so also.
Oh, perhaps maybe I'll put the burden on my shoulders then. So I'm the only one that's handcuffed and taken away.
We got your back.
Facetiously. Facetiously.
You can do it now. You can just direct now. I don't think that needs any other action. If that's your direction to me, I would certainly prepare that and send it up expeditiously.
If we could. And
I can call the AG and give them a heads up.
Absolutely.
That this is coming and what the issue is, and then follow it up. I'd assume they would reach out to all the interested parties to also submit anything as well. Or we can just transmit everything that we already have. It might save time.
Well, the bottom line is I would like to get this resolved yesterday. As Jacob mentioned, we're procurement burned out. And the public's the one that's going to start to suffer, as well as the staff and the workers. So that would be an individual request, and perhaps with support from the board.
Got a couple questions.
Councilman.
The question I have is, are you wanting this prior to any of the agenda items? Are you throwing that out as a tabling motion of some sort?
No, okay. I think the recommendation, my opinion, would be to move on the recommendation. Regardless of where we vote on that recommendation, that's still going to be my preference to direct Zev to send something to the AG.
And just the other question of staff, along the lines of the budget that has been submitted. What do we do? Augment that if things were to change, or because if we have to go month to month, July 1st is before our next meeting, so what do we do? Augment the budget, or how do we?
We're going to have to wait and see. We don't have enough information right now to come back with any sort of a budget amendment.
Well, I don't want to go to jail because our budget don't match.
I don't either.
Okay.
If I could add to that, you have the contract in place through the end of September, so your budget, at least through there, is accurate, because that would have been included. Hopefully, we have some resolution by that time, or we'll have to extend it month to month on discussions with Veolia, our existing contractor, until we get some resolution, hopefully at the same or rates, or maybe even something better, I don't know, but that's something we'd have to discuss with them. I don't know that that would negatively impact the budget or not. I believe their current rates are very similar to what is the proposal from First Transit, so it may not have much impact on the budget if we stay with the existing contract for a period of time.
Well, I thought Jacob referenced that at our last meeting, that the budget we submitted is upon this contract.
That's true, but the difference is the proposal from Veolia that you have before you in this procurement is a higher amount than the actual existing contract. And First Transit's proposal to you in this procurement is closer to the current actual numbers we're experiencing.
Oh, okay.
Right. There's differences in scope also. There's some
talking
differences in scope as well. There's extra added responsibilities under the proposed contract. But we think that, as Jacob said, there's no certainty, but we'd have to revisit it at that time.
Yeah, my recollection was when the budget we submitted is based upon the less amount from
Right.
First Transit's bid, reflects that in our budget accordingly.
Right, but that first quarter, we're still under the existing contract for the first quarter of the new fiscal year.
Right.
So it would be starting the second quarter of the fiscal year is when the issue would come up. What do we do? And that's what I'm saying. Depends on, do we have any determinations? Are we moving forward with the previous recommendation? Are we revisiting the whole thing, reprocuring? Are we extending Veolia's existing contract? And so there's a lot of uncertainties. And at that point, we'd have to come back and make a determination to amend the budget.
All right, thanks.
Mr. Chair.
Councilman Bennett, and then Commissioner June Kiliani.
Two quick questions for Zev, if I might. What kind of time frame are we looking at getting an opinion back from the AG?
Well, we
a
would
week,
make
2 weeks?
Yeah, we'd make the request immediately.
Yeah.
I can't tell you how long the AG would take. I mean, we'd impress upon them the urgency, but I don't know.
Second question, the AG's opinion, will that, depending on what, on the 4 to 3 issue, will that, will we then forego needing to go to further litigation? In other words, that's not necessarily going to resolve whatever ends up happening. Is that
from the RTC's perspective? If the AG determines that the vote was correct, then we move forward as we have, and I assume Veolia would probably litigate the other issues possibly. If the AG determines that the 4-3 vote was improper and is void, it'd be remanded back, and you'd have to revisit the issue. And then I can't tell you whether First Transit, but the AG's issue at that point would be binding on this body going forward as to how you're to perform your business, and we should bring back and clean up the policies and procedures to make it consistent. But that would not be binding on a court. It's persuasive, but if First Transit were then to challenge that and the court disagreed with the AG, we're bound by the court, not by the AG at that point.
okay?
Commissioner.
Thank you. Then to clear up in my mind, because there's sometimes when we can or can't ask for a direct AG's opinion. And I'm not sure, because in the county as commissioners, we have DAs, and unless, we can't just skip over the DA, is my understanding, and ask for an AG's opinion. Now, that may be different here because we have outside counsel, which we could then, I just wanted to make sure we had the ability to ask that as a process.
The statute on this specific issue charges the AG with the enforcement and determination.
Great.
And it says any person.
Any person,
or any
okay.
party
It's
can
different
ask.
than when we're
Correct.
sitting as a commission. Okay,
Correct.
thank you.
Well, and as Councilman Bennett raised that issue, Councilwoman leaned over and said it could very well still end up in court, so the purpose is to get the fastest decision possible, but in fact, it may end up complicating things. At the same time,
Well,
we can't assume there's going to be litigation from either party here.
Right. I think the AG's determination certainly gives direction and guidance to this board. Whether a court ultimately agrees or disagrees with the AG, so be it. But
Is it possible that those two would be on a parallel track, or would they consolidate those, Ev?
I'm sorry.
Is that, under one scenario, if we move forward with an AG opinion and litigation is taken, do those move parallel, or do they consolidate, or?
No, the AG would act independently. They may, if there's a court action, they may intervene and express their opinion to the court, their determination. I'm sure they would at that point.
It wouldn't slow down any potential litigation, though, would
Not
it?
necessarily, unless, as Mr. Woodman suggested, the parties are willing to stipulate that they'll await the AG's opinion or abide by the AG's determination.
I don't see that happening. I would not speak for the companies, but, all right, well, I think we'll come back to that discussion and move to the.
But I have my direction from you that, and I don't know about the rest of the board's opinion, but certainly from you that you'd like me to seek that determination. Is that correct?
That would be my direction.
Okay.
Independent of the recommendation from the general manager.
That's fine.
Commissioner.
Thank you. I do think, though, through statute, because we're asking them to rule on an open meeting law potential violation, that's how we would have to proceed. So just so everybody's clear, we would be saying, we're basically filing an open meeting law complaint against ourselves to get a determination, and that moves it faster, I believe, through the process.
You didn't have to frame it like that.
Okay. Sorry.
With that thought, then, yeah, Commissioner Brown did ask for it.
What happened to having my back? Now, Councilman Bennett, he's supportive of anything because he's going to be gone fishing in Mesquite pretty soon. So,
of course, Commissioner Brown, you were not one of the ones in favor of them, although you did participate in the vote, but you were on the. Yeah.
Okay.
We need publicly then to say if that's to ask for expedited, and then maybe we might have to entertain a special meeting or something. Do we have to put that at notice, or will we just go ahead and still deal with it at our regular meeting in July?
If we got, I would think if we received some kind of response from the AG earlier, we could call a special meeting.
Yeah, that's always your
We're not
prerogative.
prohibited. Okay, all right, thank you.
But Commissioner G brings up a good point that my direction is focused solely on the 4-3 statutory references that everybody's made.
And that's the only thing the Attorney General would
okay.
determine or opine on. The other issues are outside their jurisdiction.
All right, on to the recommendation from the general manager. Jacob, would you mind repeating it verbatim of 3 hours ago?
My recommendation is to deny all aspects of the protest.
Okay, you have a recommendation from staff. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
We made a motion. We need a motion.
Why don't we get a motion on that recommendation?
I'll go ahead and make the motion to follow staff's recommendation.
Thank you, Mayor. There's a motion on the floor to follow staff's recommendation to deny the protest. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Aye. Nay. So by show of hands, the ayes, please. Record show 4, and whoever's keeping the record, would you make note of those? And those opposed?
Mr. Chairman, now this is a vote only on that one aspect relating to how many votes are needed from this type of body. Okay.
No, it's the protest.
Oh, on the
On the entire, this is on the entire protest.
The only thing I'm saying is that I do agree from my past experience and what I know that it should be a 5 vote on this body. And you wouldn't take anybody. So should I vote on that one then?
You can vote on the entire protest. If you don't agree with the motion, which is to deny the entire protest, then you would vote no on this motion.
Which includes the 5.
Right.
I think since I'm not very well knowledgeable in all this, I'll just abstain from this.
That's fine.
Because I know that one rule, but I might mix up the whole rest of it.
That's fine, Councilman.
The motion from Mayor Tobler passes 4-3.
Well, no, you have 8 members present. It requires 5 votes today, so it fails.
Thank you. There's that 4-3 vote again. Okay, so that means that the protest, that's equivalent to a no vote.
A no action unless there's a motion to approve the protest, and it gets 5 votes. Absent that, there is no action and it's denied.
Okay. Yeah. Well, let's put it on the record then. I would move to accept the protest from Veolia. All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Raise your hand and say aye. Aye. Opposed to the motion, raise your hand and say nay.
Nay.
That motion fails 3-4.
So then the protest is denied effectively. Okay. And we're still seeking the Attorney General's determination.
Yes. And
well, there was not a majority vote to approve the protest, so the protest fails.
And there was a majority vote to accept it.
There was a vote to accept the protest and it failed. So it's denied effectively.
And on both of those votes, could the record reflect Councilwoman Tarkani abstaining for reasons indicated earlier? We've lost our legal counsel.
We've got plenty here, so.
Yeah, are there any attorneys in the room?
The senator and I, Chris Kemfer, Mr. Chairman, the senator and I have the same question.
Hold on, I'm going to call a 2-minute recess until our legal counsel returns, if that's. The board is in recess just for a few moments. We're going back in 1 minute. As soon as
Trade show, it's like service reduction. You better call Dr. Pena's office. I'm not going to make it. Yeah, oh yeah. Oh no, we recessed and now we're just getting started.
Thank you for your patience there. We had some
I want to go eat if I'm not.
legal clarifications. So we are going to resume item 33. Mr. Kaplan.
Yeah, you had one vote to follow the recommendation, which failed. You had a second vote to grant the protest, which failed, so there is no action at this point.
There's no action on item 33.
Correct.
Do we have any other options on item 33?
If someone else wants to try another motion, they certainly could.
Okay.
Otherwise, you can determine you want to move forward to the next item.
Okay, we will. Commissioner Giuliani?
Sorry, not to make this difficult, but I do think I mentioned earlier that we could possibly split the question. So I would make a motion to split the protest to solely accept that it would take 5 votes in order to move any action forward by this board under NRS 241, and then leave the other protest issue aside. And what that would do, Mr. Chair, is based on new information, other members of the board can make a decision on that. It moves it forward then. It's going to go to court no matter what we do. But otherwise, we have to file against ourselves an open meeting law violation, and then that's going to take additional time to get that protest. So this would, if it even secures 5 votes, if not, then we're still going to have to do the other.
So,
Councilwoman.
just for clarification, so you're not saying that we are saying that it's 5-4, just that we're separating all of the protest issues to the one issue, and we're asking that that one issue be the issue that's being considered in the protest, or?
I'm separating the question, but if you vote yes, you would agree that we should have had a 5-3 vote.
Okay.
So you have to decide on that part of it. Otherwise, we have to just do an open meeting law violation.
Okay. Well, Councilman Bennett?
Let me ask this question. If we vote on this, and somebody votes, say I vote no, it's found to be through either the AG's opinion or through the courts, it's found to be yes. What's the legal ramification personally to me, and it could be vice versa. Somebody votes yes, it's found to be no.
Well, I mean, the statute does say that if you take an action less than the majority, there are potential criminal penalties. But if you were to vote now and saying the prior action was void, which in essence you'd be doing if you uphold this issue of the protest, then there was no action taken. And I would assume, maybe I shouldn't do that, but I would assume then First Transit would be the one taking the initiative in court to try and substantiate the validity of the prior meeting and the award. But as far as the commission's concerned, you would have revisited the issue and determined it wasn't valid, and therefore I don't think you'd have any liability at that point. Now, we would then have to, so in essence now, unless a court later determines it was valid, you have no action awarding a contract, and you would have to revisit that issue either later on this agenda in your final item, which you could do, and see if you could reach a majority vote one way or the other as to what you'd like to do as a board. Or it could be, you could request that it be brought back at a future meeting. It's your discretion as the board, how you want to deal with that.
So essentially, if we were able to get a 5-3 vote here, based on the motion, that would essentially undo what we did, the vote we took the last.
That's correct.
Explain, because we're the ones that, when you talk about coming back on us, if we follow our council's recommendation, we are protected under that, correct?
Ordinarily, that's the case. You reasonably relied on counsel. I don't know what I don't know what the AG would say. I would say that that's an argument you didn't have any criminal intent to violate the law.
Okay.
Could you put that back on the record and emphasize it?
But if I might, Mr. Chair, as the duly elected individual, you can rely on the advice of your attorney, but that does not excuse you from your right and decision to make as a vote. And so if somebody wanted to press it, but I don't think anybody did anything in a willful manner in any way.
No, I agree with that. All right, so Commissioner, is that going to be in the form of a motion, or?
Can you repeat the motion, Mr. Chairman?
My motion would be to split the question with regard to the protest and separate out the item in the protest of whether or not it required a 5-3 vote in order to move the contract forward.
Thank you.
There's a motion on the floor. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed?
Nay.
Could we raise our hands again? The
Ayes or
four?
nays?
Four nays? Okay. And that motion fails on a 3-4 vote.
Wait, Councilwoman voted.
I'm sorry.
Well, what I was trying to say the last time was, the one thing I could vote on today, I thought from my experience, is if we should have had a 5 vote on this. And that's only because I've had experience with this type of situation before in other boards. I could not vote on who's the best one, but I could vote on that one thing.
I apologize, Councilwoman. So that vote should be reflected 4-4. 4 ayes, 4 nays, and likewise that fails.
That fails, yes.
All right. Since there's no action on item 33, I would put item 34. Mr. Snow?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the Commission. Item 34 is to reconsider approval of the agreement between the RTC and First Transit for operation and maintenance of fixed route transit services and take any action as appropriate. I believe Mr. Kaplan has some legal perspective to provide the board on this item.
Yeah, on this item, it would require one of the people that voted in the affirmative to approve the award of the contract to make a motion, if they so chose, to take up this matter for reconsideration. Absent that, there'd be no action on the item.
Okay. And there were 4 A votes.
Correct. So one of those 4 would have to be the one to make a motion.
Well, we kind of know where the votes are going.
We want to be pure in our public record, as clean as possible. So wait, I have my stopwatch. We'll give the motion 10 seconds. If no one is going to move forward, I guess that item would fail.
Yeah, you could, well, there'd just be no action to be taken, and you could close that item, move to your, actually, you can't move to the next item because there's been no reconsideration and there was no determination on the protest.
On item number 34, seeing and hearing no one, no action. And therefore, item number 35 is moot?
That's correct. There's no action that can be taken today on that item.
Very good.
Mr. Chairman, members of the Commission, your next item is citizens' participation.
Thank you, Mr. Snow. This is the time set aside for anyone wishing to speak to the board. Please step forward and place your name on the record. And could we get the portable mic to...
Mr. Chairman of the board and honorable board members, Bill McLeod, Senior Vice President, Veolia Transportation. Today I sat as one of the senior citizens of our illustrious organization of Veolia, and I heard a lot of things going back and forth from the legal part of both companies' arsenal. But one thing I heard today that I was taken aback on and will not let stand. I was concerned about a statement that was made in terms of Jacob Snow integrity. I've been here since day one of this transit. I've known him for many years. He's been honorable, forthright, and I do not think he would do anything purposely, illegally, in determining the outcome of this procurement. So I want to keep it pure, simple. If it's a legal issue, fine, we will fight for it, but not at the expense of anybody. That's my remarks.
Thank you, Mr. McLeod. Marcia, you have the mic? Thank you.
Is it morning or, oh, good afternoon, members of the board. I'm Marcia Herbert, volunteer advocate for the passengers and drivers of the paratransit system. With the background that I have in looking at the bids for the paratransit, I would like to point out a few things that differ. As you have heard me say too many times, I'm sure you think that that the experience and customer service on the paratransit bid were weighted so high that the other considerations, being cost, training, safety, bus maintenance, key personnel, and overall plans, were not sufficient to get that bidder an approved bid. Now we come to the fixed bus bid, and at least one of your evaluators gave experience to First Transit, who has not operated the fixed bus route. In addition to which, the weighting is now apparent that experience doesn't matter, like it did in the paratransit, because you're not taking into consideration not only has Veolia operated the bus system since 1993, but as Jacob points out to us, they have contributed to a #1 rating in the country for our fixed bus route. And to minimize that without further consideration, I think is unjust. And not to Veolia, but to the citizens of Las Vegas and the tourists that depend on the bus route. I am not going to reiterate the problems that the passengers have with the paratransit system under First Transit's regime, but it is significant. You have read my emails, you have heard me speak before, and I would not understand how they feel that they are going to do a major bus route when they can't do a small paratransit route without complaints. If it wasn't for Kenny Rodriguez, I don't know if Kenny's here, and the members of his staff that help me when I get calls from passengers that are in trouble and need immediate help, we would have people still waiting for a bus. I just had it Monday. I had a driver who was late, no problem, but he went right past where I was standing and never slowed down to pick me up. He registered me as a no-show, and then when a customer in the parking lot slowed him down. Well, people are experiencing that and other things, and we shouldn't have to put the burden on RTC to perform the contract that was awarded to First Transit. And so I ask you to look at that when you're evaluating who can do a better job. I'm not saying money is the issue, but I would also like to point out that I think I can say very easily on record that if you ask First Transit for their employment records and check the attrition rate of their high-paid experienced drivers, which is a small percentage I give you of the total drivers, compare that with the attrition rate of the newbies. And you know I love our drivers, but that would be another consideration, that they tend to not keep the long-term, highly paid employees. And maybe that's how, or at least part of the reason that their payroll bids are so in opposition with the ones from the current carrier. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marcia. Are they applauding? Are they applauding you coming up to the mic?
Pardon?
Go ahead.
Oh, thank you very much.
Please.
Good afternoon.
I was here for the last meeting on the award of the contract. I must say that I'm really disappointed today that we couldn't get this resolved.
And would you state your name for the record?
My name is Jeffrey Jarvis. I'm a former employee of Veolia. But there's just some things I really want to bring to your attention again. It has been 8 months, nearly 8 months, since I've been terminated. I have 2 different rulings from the state of Nevada that rule in my favor that they can't figure out why I'm terminated. While I'm standing here today, I want to issue a challenge to Veolia. Mr. Young, I know you're in the crowd. I challenge you to arbitration. I'm tired of waiting for you to do something and get me back to work. And there's 3 other people that you are not treating fairly to get us back to work. I'm challenging you to arbitration or get me back to work with all my back pay. But this has just gone way too far. Veolia says that they treat their employees fairly. Believe me, they don't. If you want more labor disputes, you're going to have them if you keep Veolia here. They have started it down in Phoenix. It is starting here. It is not going to end. It's only going to escalate. But I came here last month and asked you about the same thing. And I'm still sitting here to this day, almost 8 months out of work. And so far, the only stinking offer that Veolia has made to me was to buy me out. They don't want to give me a job. They just want to buy me out. They think money can buy them out of all their problems. And it can't. Not anymore. But that's what I wanted to say, because this has got to stop. There's been far too many wrongful terminations. I'm going on 8 months. There's 3 people ahead of me, so it's anywhere from 8 months to 2 years that people have been out of work, and Veolia has declined and refused to listen to their cases, and the primary cause of this is Lou Young and Greg Cook, right up here in the crowd. And that's the primary cause of the whole situation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jeffrey. Next speaker, please.
Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, my name is Tom Buktelich. I live on Fusilier Drive in North Las Vegas, and I've spoken to you before, and I appreciate your time. By the time I was 15 years old, I was in and out of judges' chambers. I was already a paralegal in training. So I know a little bit about law. Far be it from me to argue with these fine people here, okay? But there is an overarching law as we stand under the Almighty. The purpose of our body of laws here in Nevada, our body of laws here in the United States, is to benefit people. And we are the people. We are the workers who built this transit system. We are the workers who serve these passengers, okay? And after all the legal argument is said and done, that legal argument ultimately is to benefit the workers and the customers and the passengers. And I thank you for your support. I look forward to continuing our struggle to continue to retain the beautiful transit system that we've built with the help of Mr. Snow and his staff and employees. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Tom.
Thanks, Tom.
Council members, I was hoping to address you as Madam Mayor today. My name is Bronwyn McKelvey. Y'all all got an email from me the other day. And I did get a response from your office. Thank you, Mr. Ross. This whole thing has brought out a lot of arguing, fighting in-house amongst employees, ourselves, because we all have our own opinions. We're all entitled. That's part of being a human. But I am new to this city. I've only been here 5 years. But in what I've seen, just since I've come here, I became a driver after being a passenger. I worked at a little casino, and I rode the buses. I depended on the buses for my transportation to and from my employer. I became friends with drivers, and that's how I got here. This situation that's going on now is going to hurt a lot of those people in more than one way. I stated it in my email. Insurance, it's not just about money. It's about people's livelihoods and people's lives. Insurance, FMLA rights, everything for people who have issues and pre-existing health conditions are gonna stop because of the way insurance companies do. The only way it won't is to keep our current employer. And the majority of us, if y'all saw that petition that we put out, that was put out by a driver, not by Veolia. We back Veolia. We want Veolia. We enjoy working for them. And I'm sorry, Mr. Snow, in this I think you're wrong. I really do. I really, really do. I think all of y'all are wrong. It's your opinions, that's what y'all think, but y'all are basing it on money, not the whole grand picture. The RTC system wouldn't be what it is today if it wasn't for Veolia. It's not just y'all. Veolia helped get it there. And you've got to remember that too. I agree with you. Loyalty. Loyalty. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Shane Wonder. I've been with Veolia about 17 years, back when it was ATC and Ford, and I've always enjoyed working with them. I've also had the opportunity to work with First Transit. I'm sure they'll remember my name now. I'm back home where I feel I belong, and I'm very happy. And I do agree with my fellow co-workers that Veolia is what we want. 886 of us stood up and stated this in a petition that was from the heart to the commissioners, stating what we want. You know, I understand everything's about budgets, dollar figures, but it's also about the community and the service that we as workers have to come to work in a happy environment to produce that kind of service. It's us that produces it. So if we have to take the lower benefits, the lower wages, okay, even though they say they're not, I see your, don't think so, but I've read North County Transit, okay? I've spoken with people there in California that they've done this. They've cut wages, they've cut benefits, they've let people go. Come July, they're gonna go back to the commission and ask for more money to the client. Is that what's gonna happen here? Okay, that's something that needs to be figured out, okay? There was a comment made that Veolia flew in employees from other properties. We're from Vegas, right?
Yeah, been here 18 years.
Okay, we're not being paid to do this. We enjoy our work. We enjoy our city. We enjoy all of you guys, okay? We enjoy the positive influence, and we enjoy having our voice, okay? And we want to continue to do an excellent service for you guys. Move forward, stay with Veolia, and make this the #1 service, transit agency in this state.
In the world, brother. In the world. We ain't gonna stop at one state.
Thank you.
Thank you, Shane.
County Commissioner, Chairman, Herman Ross, National Insurance Consultants. It's interesting that the last time I came up and spoke of the 4 people that voted for First Transit, 3 of them were gone at that time for my comments, and now 3 of them are, are gone this time. I
Herman,
appreciate you staying. Yes.
Let me, just for the record, Councilman Bennett actually stayed an hour longer. He had to cancel some appointments.
Okay.
Mayor has a daughter's birthday party that he's late for.
Well, I was just speaking on the record that they were
I
gone
know,
the last time as well as this time.
But I want to defend them in their absence.
Okay.
It's nothing personal.
I don't take it personal.
Councilman Eliason, they're discharging into our wash, so he ran away knowing that the county was going to sue Northwest.
Well, just going on public record, as I stated before, I think when you come down to price, instead of as Chris G. stated and Steve stated, is that you need to look at the overall picture. And it doesn't seem like, and trust me, I've seen you guys for I don't know, 15 years now that I've been, and you guys have done a great job. I just think this time it's wrong. And I think that we didn't look at the overall picture. And one of the things I would like to really state is that we need to figure out a way that we're not taking money out of this state from local businesses. Also, our unemployment rate is high enough as it is. There are going to be firms, including mine, that are going to have to reevaluate how we're going to keep some of our employees when we have a longtime partner that's gone. I don't think, correct me if I'm wrong, if that wasn't brought into play with regards to this particular RFP. And in the future, as we've stated, we would hope, and yes, I do work for Veolia in several different locations around the country, there are local preferences. Regardless of what they say with regards to the FTA requirements, federal funds as DBE requirements, they only apply to those funds that go towards the DBE requirements, and I help write that law. One of the things that needs to be brought to the attention, and Ms. Starkanian, since you are new to the board, so that you would understand the 5.4% DBE requirements here, that's where it would apply to, not the overall project amount. So let's make that real clear. When it comes to Veolia Transportation versus First Transit, as I stated before, I've tried to work with both of them. Historically, good faith effort doesn't work, and I hope that we make sure that it doesn't work here in Las Vegas. Thank you very much for your time. County Commissioner, I appreciate you.
Thank you, Herman.
Thank you.
Hey, Zev, on that earlier comment, he makes a good point when we were looking at ways to encourage or recommend contractors look locally. If there's a way we can analyze separating what federal funds versus local, if that means anything under state statute, I think that's a good point.
Commissioner Brown, RTC Commissioner, Stanley Washington, Las Vegas for the record. Well, we are in Las Vegas, and as in Las Vegas, when you're at the gambling table, you do have to deal with the hand that you're dealt. And this is the hand that the committee's been dealt today. Mr. Snow has made his recommendation. As Commissioner Woodbury said in the past, this community's benefited from his wisdom and knowledge in the past, so we'll see how this one goes. But Mr. Snow, you do have to admit, First Transit has a ways to go on their diversity record. Throughout this whole proceedings, I've still yet to see any document that says anything that they've done locally here relative to diversity here. And you can show me one, I'm willing to look at it. But moving forward, we're going to go ahead and do a better job moving forward there. I've talked to Mr. Thomas, and I believe him to be an honorable man, and I look forward to working with you and Mr. Thomas and the First Transit team to make sure we kind of get this thing right. I'm fatigued, and I haven't been doing it half as long as you guys, so I'm ready to go ahead and get moving forward. And the only thing I want to do is we have a lot of veterans and a lot of people who need to be working out there. Well, let's get the process moving forward. And I want to say to the County Commission, to the RTC Commission, you guys have worked hard. You've done the best you could, and that's all we can ever ask from you. Thank you.
Thank you, Stanley. Well, well, well. Where have you been hiding?
Well, I hate to bore. My name is Teddy Russell the Fifth, a resident of Las Vegas. I don't want to bore you with details, but I died on Christmas. I'm here. Not only did I die on Christmas, but because when Las Vegas Fire and Rescue got to my place in AMR, I had no pulse or respiration, so therefore I could not say UMC. I could not say Sunrise. So they threw me into the hellhole of Valley Hospital. I dismissed myself against medical advice, pulled the tooth out. I said, if you send me a bill, I'll sue you or something or other off. Anyway, I just wanted to tell you, I'm so awfully pleased with you. You do well all the time. I depend so much on the RTC. You make me on behalf of the President of the United States, the White House communication team, and the Secretary of Transportation, it gives me great pleasure and honor to thank you. Have a great day.
Thank you, Teddy. Good to have you back.
Good evening. My name is Raymond Brown, and to the board, Snow. I just wanted to say one thing here. You know, it's a long process that you guys are having to go through. Mr. Snow, this is one thing I've learned from my dad. You been with a company X amount of years, They've done a fairly good job for you. Yeah, you got your ups, you got your downs. But you had a company that's been good to you, done things that you needed to be done. You went to the drawing board, you have had your knots, your battles, but you was always able to sit down at the table, talk about it, work things out for the good of the communities, the good of the companies. I think now you've got a good company in, they've given the employees good benefits. There's room for improvement. It's always room for improvement. I don't care what company, whether it's First Transit or Veolia, it's room for improvement. Sit down with your Veolia company. If you decide, I can't tell you who to take. I don't have the money to buy them or to take them. But you got a company that you've been with for X amount of years. They've done what you asked. Yeah, you bumped heads. Sit down at the table, but you worked it out. And I think this is a process that you can do again. You can sit down at the table, you can work it out. Veolia's not perfect. First Transit ain't gonna be perfect either. It's gonna be some cuts, but nobody wants to lose a job. Veolia says none of the employees are gonna lose their jobs. Veolia, First Transit comes in with a very low bid. I've been around with my dad when bidding. People who give low bids, you get what you pay for. Let me just put it to you like that. It's not going to be the best. Your benefits won't be the best. Your employees will suffer. They're not going to be happy because it's going to be more money coming out of their pocket. And you know yourself, benefits means a lot to the employees. So look at the whole picture. If it's any way possible, sit down, think about it. I don't know your religion or nothing, but pray about it. Ask God to give you some directions and some guidance that you'll make the right decisions. And I think you'll come out with the right decision by sitting down at the table, talking to Veolia if it's necessary. Tell them what you want. Tell them what you need. Veolia, you got to sit down with these guys. Tell them what you can do and come to a compromise. That's what it's all about. And let's make Veolia's number 8 on the list. Let's go to number 1, but we got to do it together. We can't keep doing it like we're doing it right here, because nobody's going to win. Y'all guys are going to end up in court, and there's going to be a lot of money spent. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. My name is Sergio Flores. I've been with the company for 7 years. I started both as a driver, and now I'm a body mechanic. One of the things that is confusing to me, last meeting in May, Mr. Jacob Snow, from what I understood was if they awarded the contract to First Transit, there wasn't going to be 100,000 hours in cuts. Now, per the 4-3 vote in May, the very following day, a couple days afterwards, there were cuts. I mean, the 5-3 vote still, 4-3, still confusing. Those cuts still happen, regardless. Was that right? Was that wrong? Or I don't know if you were misleading the commission in that, or I don't know. I must have to review the video on YouTube. But that's one of the things that are confusing right now. Now, one of the things also that the commission has to understand is that these aren't just Veolia workers. These are taxpayers. They own homes. Most of them spouses, they're probably single income families. Their spouses have lost jobs. They're barely hanging on to the health benefits that they have because of the job that they hold. If you turn around and decide to award this contract to First Transit, with all due respect, whoever's still here, no offense intended, you start as a new employee, which means you won't have benefits for the first year. Health benefits, you have to meet certain requirements, so on and so forth. So people that are ill are going to have to go without, a probationary period for 4 or 5 months, health benefits 6 months later. Some people can't wait. I, for one, have my wife that's diabetic and my son's asthmatic. I can't wait 6 months without health insurance. Most of friends and colleagues are upside down in their mortgages right now. They're barely hanging on. Award this contract, and those are the people that you're hurting. You're hurting Las Vegas, not Mesquite, not Boulder City. You're hurting Las Vegas, North Las Vegas, and people that live here. It concerns us. When have you seen this many people here over an issue like this? because it concerns people in Las Vegas. This is what I'm asking. Throw the RFP out, reconsider it, see everything that we're trying to tell you. 889 people are trying to tell you something. Those are the people that are going to hurt this community. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Sergio.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Mr. Snow, I want to be number one. I think we can do it together with Veolia. I'm not satisfied with 8. I think we can be number one. Raymond, the mechanic, said a lot of stuff I wanted to say. Go to the table. You know, one person don't like this person. It happens everywhere. I'm quite sure. You know you the man. Okay, you the man. We know it. But let's go for number one. Like you say, is it worth the few dollars saved? You know, because we're going to be bitter. A lot of employees are going to be mad. If they cut anything we have, employees going to be the hottest fish grease. They're going to be mad. And you're not going to get too much out of a mad employee. You know what I mean? You're going to have more incidents. You're going to have more accidents. You're going to have more complaints, period. Somebody get up there, cuss you out, what you think the driver going to do? He mad already. You know, but I think we can make it, at least the top 2. I think we can make it. With Veolia leadership, a couple things I would like to implement, but y'all never ask us drivers our opinion, and we should be the ones that you talk to. We make it happen. Am I right? You buy the equipment, lovely equipment. I'm from Detroit, trust me, we have lovely equipment. I went home to visit, the bus was like this, okay? So I appreciate you. And I also would like to apologize to First Transit. Last time I spoke, I said they didn't have a vision plan. They have one, it's just not as good as ours. So I would like to apologize.
And ma'am, could you put your name on the record?
Linda Johnson Sanders, sir.
Thank you, Linda.
But I'm just proud to be a part of this team, you know? And like I said before, my father retired from Chrysler. He had perfect attendance for 31 years. You know, so I'm a product of just good stock, I will call it. But please, whatever needs to be worked out, good shot of espresso, talk to Veolia. Okay, let's work it out. Let's go for number one. Okay, let's do it. We can do it. And them few dollars, I'm quite sure we can make them up somewhere along the line. Okay, we don't have to cut service. Everything can be worked out if we're willing to do it. I beg you, Mrs. Snow, consider my proposal. Have a good day.
Thank you, Linda. And thank you all for hanging with us today. Is there anyone else wishing to speak? Seeing no one, this meeting is adjourned.